Let's head over to the small, quiet town of Malang in North Cotabato, Philippines. It's a place known for its calm vibe and rural charm, where life moves at a slower pace. The people here are deeply connected to the land, relying on agriculture for their livelihood. In this peaceful town lived the Maguad family. Unlike many others, they led a pretty stable life. Cruz Maguad, the father, was an elementary school teacher who was well respected and loved by everyone, often being praised for his hard work. His wife, Lovella, was the principal at the same school. Together, while they didn't make a lot of money, they were considered one of the more privileged families in town. Their youngest child, Criziol Lewis, was 16 years old. He dreamed of becoming a lawyer even at such a young age and was determined to work hard to achieve that goal. Besides being intelligent, he was also creative, playing guitar, drawing, and reading in his spare time. His older sister, Criziol Gwyn, was the more intense one, super smart, driven, and goal-oriented. She had always been that way as a kid, being a Girl Scout with a sash covered in so many badges that there was no room for more. Gwyn didn't stop there. She enrolled in a pre-med program during high school and planned to become a doctor. By all accounts, Gwyn was the type of person who would sit with you at a party if you were feeling shy, sticking by your side until you felt at ease. That's how she met 17-year-old Janice Sibiel. However, unlike Gwyn and Lewis, Janice's childhood was far from happy. She wasn't privileged enough to attend school and had to work from a very young age. Even worse, she grew up without parents. Her first real memories began around the age of 8. Before that, everything was a blur. She only recalls being found by a stranger wandering alone on a huge shipping container boat. Her parents were nowhere to be found, and Janice believed they had abandoned her. A stranger was kind enough to post her picture and name online in an attempt to find her parents. They shared her story on Facebook and various online forums, but no one ever came forward. Eventually, Janice was dropped off at the Philippine version of Child Protective Services, the Department of Social Welfare and Development, where she moved from one foster home to another. Not long after, Janice was offered a live-in nanny job by a family. Though she hated the job, she was incredibly grateful for the opportunity. Janice shared all of this with Gwyn, and Gwyn was so deeply moved by her story that an idea began to form in her mind, an idea that could give Janice the safe, loving home she deserved: adoption. Together with Lewis, Gwyn decided to present this idea to their parents. Like a well-thought-out thesis, they approached the subject with serious dedication, explaining that adopting Janice wouldn't just change her life, it would help their family too. They convinced their parents that Janice could pitch in with the chores around the house, which was a significant consideration in their Asian family culture. It wasn't uncommon for children to share the responsibility of washing dishes, cleaning, and cooking. With one more set of hands to help, the family would run more smoothly. Gwyn's parents weren't exactly rolling in money, but they believed in teaching responsibility. The kids had chores, had to keep their grades up, and attended church every Sunday. They were strict, but it was out of love. Gwyn and Lewis respected that. In 2021, Janice moved in, and it was like she was instantly part of the family. The Maguad welcomed her with open arms. Lewis even gave up his own room so Janice could have a more comfortable one. They enrolled her in school right away, and for the first time, Janice didn't have to wake up with the constant worry of finding food or going to work. She was finally allowed to be a kid. As Janice settled into her new life, the bond between the three siblings grew stronger by the day. We could see the happiness shining through, especially in the videos they posted on TikTok. Janice even got to experience a family vacation for the first time, something she had always dreamed of. Laughter filled the air as they explored new places together, creating memories she would cherish forever. For once, Janice felt like she belonged to something bigger, something safe and full of love. But just when everything seemed perfect, Janice's world was about to shatter. On December 10th of that same year, she posted a series of statuses on Facebook claiming that she and her siblings were under attack. It was just days before Christmas, a time that should have been filled with joy. Instead, it marked the beginning of a nightmare. At that time, Mr. Cruz, their father, was at school doing some chores related to the upcoming holiday, while Lovella, their mother, was away on a work trip. Everything changed when Mr. Cruz received a phone call that left him frozen in terror. The voice on the other end told him that their home was being ransacked and his children were inside. By 3:15 in the afternoon, Cruz finally arrived at the house. It was eerily silent outside the front door. His eyes locked onto a blood-soaked blanket on the ground with a knife nearby. He called out for his kids, but there was no response. He moved quickly to the back door and managed to find a way inside. Cruz moved rapidly through the house, his voice echoing off the walls as he searched for his children. When he entered the living room, that a horrifying sight met his eyes. There, lying on the floor, was his daughter Gwyn. A towel soaked in blood was wrapped around her body, her limbs and torso were covered in multiple slash wounds. But it was the injuries on her neck that were particularly severe. Crime scene photos later revealed the gruesome extent of the wounds. Her flesh was torn apart, and ants had already begun to gather on her body. Not far from Gwyn, near the main door, Cruz found Lewis. His hands and feet were bound, and a gag covered his mouth. His body was riddled with fresh stab wounds, and the amount of blood suggested that the attack had happened just moments before Cruz arrived. But there was one more person missing. Janice's heart pounded as Cruz continued to search the house, calling her name. Finally, Janice appeared. She emerged from her room, her hair wet and her face pale and shaken. She was in shock, barely able to speak. Seeing her, Cruz immediately called the police. The officers arrived soon after, stepping into a crime scene that would later be described as one of the most gruesome in the Philippines. Blood pooled on the floor, and the house bore the marks of extreme violence. Janice, while trembling, told the officers that they had been attacked. The house was in disarray, cabinets had been pried open and personal belongings were scattered across the rooms. At first glance, it seemed like a robbery. However, investigators knew that appearances could be deceiving. They needed to confirm whether anything valuable had been taken to solidify the robbery theory. At the same time, as part of their protocol, the police did not rule out the parents as persons of interest. The police needed to confirm their alibis and whereabouts during the attack. The investigators turned their attention to the room where Janice said she was hiding during the attack. It was messy, but that wasn't unusual for a robbery scene. What stood out, though, were the details that didn't add up. The disarray in the room, though chaotic, didn't have the usual signs of a real robbery. So the police began to search the house more carefully, and they soon found some crucial evidence just outside the front door. The police discovered a blood-stained shirt, which they believed had been dropped by the attacker while trying to escape. About 100 meters away, they found a plastic bag in a ditch. Inside were bloody pants and underwear. It seemed the attacker had deliberately discarded these items to hide evidence. Inside the house, the scene became increasingly horrifying. The living room floor was littered with shards of glass and broken bottles, a clear sign of the violence that had unfolded there. Expansive pools of blood reveal the brutal nature of the attack. Among the carnage, investigators discovered a discarded knife, a baseball bat, and a hammer, each stained with blood. These weapons were assumed to have been used in the murders. Crime scene analysts took careful note of the blood patterns, which provided key insights into the sequence of events. They determined that Gwyn, the older sibling, had likely been killed first. Her blood had partially coagulated and rigor mortis had already begun to set in. In contrast, Lewis's blood appeared much fresher, suggesting he had been murdered after Gwyn. The different states of the blood and bodies made this theory even more plausible. Lewis's hands and feet were bound, while Gwyn's were not. This discrepancy indicated that Gwyn might have been ambushed and killed quickly, while Lewis was restrained, likely to prevent him from resisting before his own murder. The fact that so many different tools were used and that the victims had distinctive types of wounds strongly suggested the involvement of more than one attacker. This theory was supported by the fact that Lewis had been restrained. It would have been difficult for a single person to control a victim while also carrying out such a brutal attack. Adding to the mystery, Cruz confirmed that the weapons found at the scene were his. The murderers seemed to have used tools that were readily available in the house, which made the crime even more unsettling. As investigators continued to gather evidence, they found something that stood out. The family's laundry machine had been used, but there were no freshly washed clothes anywhere in the house. This odd discovery suggested that something unusual had happened after the crime, perhaps an attempt to erase evidence or cover their tracks. The extreme brutality of the crime prompted local authorities to launch a manhunt for the suspects. The public was shocked, and the need for justice became urgent. To help with the investigation, the vice of the Municipal Council of Malang, North Cotabato announced a reward of 200,000 pesos for any information leading to the capture of the perpetrators. The mayor also offered an additional 50,000 pesos as a bounty. These actions emphasized the gravity of the case and the community's desperate need for answers. Autopsies were performed on Gwyn and Lewis over 2 days, starting on December 13, 2021, and the results were chilling. Gwyn had sustained 32 stab and slash wounds, some of which were deep enough to almost sever her limbs. One of her ears had been cut off, and her neck and upper arm were nearly severed. Her body also showed signs of blunt force trauma, likely caused by the hammer and baseball bat found at the scene. Additionally, the backs of her hands were bruised, covered in defensive wounds, indicating that she had fought fiercely. Meanwhile, Lewis had endured 51 knife wounds, some so deep that they exposed his bones and internal organs. Red marks on his neck suggested he may have been strangled. Unlike his sister, Lewis had no defensive wounds. He also had signs of blunt force trauma on his limbs and torso. All these injuries were consistent with the weapons recovered at the scene. Investigators quickly ruled out the possibility of a robbery gone wrong. Though the rooms appeared ransacked, only Gwyn's phone was missing. Nothing else of value had been taken, leading authorities to believe that the killer or killers were familiar with the victims. It was also striking that the crime took place in broad daylight, which made the entire situation even more unsettling. Before the autopsy results were made public, rumors began circulating online accusing Janice of being involved in the crime. These rumors gained traction due to her survival, the weapons being from the family home, and the locked front door. The accusations grew increasingly intense, with some even threatening Janice. Under the mounting pressure, the police decided to question her. Janice described the events of that day. She had been studying with Gwyn in her bedroom while Lewis was downstairs in the living room. Suddenly, they heard screams, and 3 men broke into the house. The 2 girls rushed downstairs and saw the 3 men attacking Lewis with the weapons found at the scene. The attackers then turned on Gwyn. In fear, Janice fled upstairs, locked herself in her bedroom, and hid under the bed. Janice was too scared to call the police, so instead, she texted the family group chat asking for help. Later, she messaged her adoptive mom saying, "Mom, help." When no one saw those messages, Janice went a step further and posted on social media, saying, "Help. Somebody has broken into the house. I don't want to die. I'm hiding in my room. Help." After a few minutes, she deleted the post, worried the attackers might see it and come after her. By the time someone saw the post and reached out to her mom, Janice was too scared to pick up. She even changed her social media username and put her phone on silent, clearly trying to hide. When the house finally fell silent, Janice emerged from her hiding place, too afraid to go downstairs. She claimed she took a shower and changed clothes to calm herself, finishing just as Cruz arrived home. However, there was something odd about this part of the story. Janice had told the police she locked herself in her bedroom the moment the attack began, so why did her room look like it had been ransacked? That raised serious questions. More importantly, Janice's version of events was directly at odds with the forensic evidence. The autopsy results and the way the injuries were distributed made it clear that Gwyn was the first victim, not Lewis. This major discrepancy between Janice's account and the evidence made investigators even more suspicious. Something wasn't adding up, and they started to take a closer look at Janice's statements. At first, she told the police her phone was off during the attack, but Cruz remembered calling her phone and hearing it ring with no answer. When Janice was confronted with this, she changed her story again, now claiming that she had been in the shower and hadn't heard her phone ringing. This was starting to sound suspicious. But that wasn't the only thing that raised eyebrows. Cruz also revealed some information about the murder weapons that added fuel to the fire. The baseball bat used in the attack originally belonged to Lewis. He had kept it in his room on the top bunk as a kind of protection. However, after being adopted by Cruz, Janice had taken over the top bunk. The hammer used in the attack was another tool that Cruz kept around for home repairs. He was very careful about where he stored it, usually hiding it behind the washing machine. Cruz mentioned that only 3 people knew exactly where that hammer was: himself, Gwyn, and Janice. This meant that the killer or killers had to have known the family's routines and possessions very well, almost as if they had been living in the house with them. Things became even more suspicious when a delivery driver came forward. The driver had arrived at the house just 18 minutes before Cruz was contacted by a neighbor who noticed that no one had answered the door. The driver kept calling out, hoping someone would respond. Eventually, he noticed a woman peering at him through a door before she suddenly walked away. The woman's identity was never confirmed, but it raised serious doubts about where Janice was and what she was doing during the attack. At the crime scene, it had been locked from the inside, and there were no signs of forced entry. This was significant because it meant that whoever had done this was likely someone familiar with the house, someone who had access to a key and could lock the door after the crime. At this point, it was pretty clear that Janice had something to do with the murders. However, since Janice was only 17 years old, still a minor. Under Philippine law, the police couldn't arrest her without solid proof. This legal issue made them tread carefully, as they couldn't move forward with an arrest until they had more definitive evidence. Rather than arresting her immediately, the authorities placed Janice under the care of the Social Welfare Department while they investigated who had actually committed the murders. If Janice's claim about other people being involved was true, the police had a considerable amount of work ahead of them. 5 days after the murders, a significant breakthrough occurred. The police discovered Janice's fingerprints on the murder weapons. This was a huge deal, but it wasn't the smoking gun. After all, Janice had lived in the house where the weapons were stored, so her prints could have been there simply from handling them. Still, it was a lead they couldn't ignore. To ensure she wasn't treated unfairly, Janice was given a lawyer by the Social Welfare Department. However, things took another unexpected turn when Lavella, Janice's adoptive mother, found a contact tracing form while searching Janice's room for clues. To her surprise, it wasn't Janice's form. It belonged to a 17-year-old boy named Esmeraldo Aldo Cano Jr. Aldo was a sacristan at a local church, and Janice had known him from the orphanage. This discovery sent the police scrambling to determine if Aldo had anything to do with the murders. Soon enough, witnesses came forward confirming that Aldo had been near the crime scene on the day of the killings. One woman stated she saw Aldo drop Janice off near the house right before the murders, and another neighbor said she saw him asking for directions to the house that morning. When shown a picture of Aldo, the woman immediately recognized him. Then, on December 16th, 6 days after the murder, Janice, with her lawyer present, gave a full confession. She admitted to being involved in the murders along with Aldo. Janice explained that her motive stemmed from deep resentment and jealousy. She felt that Gwyn and Lewis were receiving all the love and attention from their parents. In her mind, they were standing in the way of her getting the affection she had longed for. She even confessed that killing them would leave her as the only child in the family, guaranteeing that she would get all the love and attention she had recently started receiving after being adopted. Janice revealed that her ultimate goal was to take Gwyn's place in the family, driven by years of emotional neglect in the orphanage where she had grown up. By December 18th, Janice's confession was officially recorded, although it was inconsistent, much like many of her previous statements. The police tracked down Aldo, who voluntarily surrendered, admitting his role as well. Forensic analysis later confirmed that blood found on discarded clothing in a ditch belonged to Aldo. Like Janice, Aldo was also a minor, so he was placed under the care of the Social Welfare Department. Later that same day, in an unrelated banned substance raid, police arrested a 17-year-old for possession of illegal substances. When they searched his phone, they found something that tied him to the case: Gwyn's stolen cell phone. The serial number confirmed it had been taken after the murders. The police pieced it together. Janice had enlisted Aldo to sell the phone because she couldn't get rid of it herself. Unfortunately, the phone had been damaged, making it impossible to retrieve any useful data. The boy who had the phone wasn't involved in the murders, he had simply bought it from Aldo. Because Janice and Aldo were minors, the police couldn't release any juicy details about their confessions to the public, despite the parents pressing for information. As the investigation progressed, Janice stopped cooperating, making it even harder to figure out exactly what had happened. Some people believe Janice's confessions weren't even the full story. Whispers circulated that the murders were even worse than she had let on, like the possibility that Louis was tied up and forced to watch as his sister was murdered before he was killed as well. After the shocking confessions, Lovella, the siblings' mother, was interviewed and reflected on the warning signs she had missed. According to Lovella, they had adopted Janice 5 months before the murders. At first, everything seemed fine, the family welcomed her, and she appeared grateful. However, soon small red flags began to show. In August 2021, when Gwyn's parents were hospitalized, Cruz noticed that 10,000 pesos, about $170, set aside for emergencies was missing. Janice claimed thieves had taken it, but the next day a large sum was found hidden in her school bag. After some questioning, Janice admitted she had taken the money. Despite this breach of trust, the family, particularly Gwyn, chose to forgive her. They were sympathetic to her troubled past, attributing the theft to the survival instinct she had developed after years of hardship. Janice apologized, and the family, hoping this was a one-time mistake. They accepted her apology, believing the worst was behind them. However, as months passed, Janice's behavior started to shift in unsettling ways. She became lazy, irresponsible, neglecting household chores and showing a disregard for reminders. She apologized but never followed through. Although troubling, it didn't raise any immediate alarms until the morning of the murders. On that day, Janice did something she had never done before. She called Cruz and Lovella mom and dad for the first time. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a red flag, indicating a deeper, darker shift in her emotional state. It was as if something had clicked in her mind, setting in motion what was about to happen. As the investigation unfolded, more shocking truths came to light. Janice had lied about her origins from the start. Her story of being an orphan was a fabrication. Her parents were alive and had spent years desperately searching for her. When the case went viral, Filipino amateur sleuths dug into her past and uncovered a nearly decade-old missing persons notice. Her parents weren't very active on Facebook back then, so they missed the post. Fast forward to the murders, and that same post started circulating online again. It didn't take long for Janice's biological parents to recognize her. Born in 2005, Janice was the youngest of 3 children, but her childhood was filled with chaos. Her father's gambling addiction tore the family apart, and after remarrying, her mother tried to make the best of the situation by dividing what little they had left among her children. Eventually, Janice and her siblings were placed in different orphanages. By 2020, Janice had actually reunited with her biological family, but that reunion didn't last long. Her relatives later claimed she cut them off, saying they were too poor to be of any use to her. This betrayal shocked everyone. Things took a darker turn when Janice's biological mother, devastated by what her daughter had done, attended the funeral of Gwyn and Louis. In her grief, she kept apologizing, overwhelmed with guilt about her daughter's actions. In one heartbreaking moment, Janice's biological mother even knelt down, but the Maguad weren't seeking revenge. They made it clear that they weren't angry, only seeking justice. They insisted that Janice's biological mother encourage her daughter to confess. Janice's mother tried to visit Janice at the social welfare office, but Janice refused to see her, citing strict rules. Then, the investigation took a jaw-dropping turn when evidence surfaced suggesting the murders were premeditated. Screenshots of a conversation between Janice and an unknown person went viral. In the messages, Janice confessed that she wanted to kill her siblings, thinking their deaths would give her the freedom she craved. She even wondered if anyone would still accept her if she committed murder, expressing a chilling belief that no matter what she did, God would forgive her if she asked. Some sources claim that Janice often talked about the 2009 horror movie The Orphan, a film about a young girl adopted by a family who ultimately betrays and kills them. She even posted on Facebook that she loved the movie and watched it repeatedly. When Janice's trial began, her behavior was just as disturbing. She was seen smiling and laughing in court, showing no remorse or regret. Cruz and Lovella, devastated by the loss of their children, said in interviews that they might have forgiven Janice if she had shown even a hint of genuine remorse, but her coldness only deepened their pain. The case became a national sensation in the Philippines. From March 2022, when Janice and Esmeralda were officially charged with murder, to their conviction on May 17, 2022, the case was closely followed by the public. Janice Sibiel was sentenced to 31 years in prison, while Esmeralda Aldo Cano Jr. received a 29-year sentence. However, both sentences came with one condition: they would serve them under the supervision of the Department of Social Welfare and Development until their 21st birthdays, after which they would be transferred to adult prisons. Gwyn and Lewis's parents had mixed feelings about the trial's outcome. While they recognized that the courts handed down the toughest punishment possible under the law, they felt the laws were too soft. The biggest issue, however, was Janice's complete lack of remorse. Cruz and Lovella were outspoken against Republic Act 9344, which limits the legal accountability of minors. According to this law, the minimum age for criminal liability is 15, and individuals between the ages of 15 and 18 can be held accountable but are sent to youth centers or rehab programs instead of adult prisons. This law prevents minors like Janice from being tried as adults, even for heinous crimes. Many argued that kids shouldn't be capable of planning or committing such brutal acts. In the US and other countries, minors committing these kinds of crimes would have been tried as adults. Cruz and Lovella felt strongly that Janice's age shouldn't excuse her from taking full responsibility, especially for such a violent and premeditated crime. This view was shared by many who felt the law was too lenient in cases like this. They publicly called for changes to the law, wanting those who commit violent acts at a young age to be held fully accountable. Some of the most heartbreaking facts to come out of the investigation revealed that Gwyn almost escaped. She had the chance to run, but when she heard Lewis calling for help, she went back, hoping to save her brother. The street was calm and peaceful late at night. Suddenly, the calm was broken by a noise. What happened next was shockingly violent and seemed carefully planned. The most troubling part was that she had warned others about the possibility of this event, but no one intervened. Alessandra Matuzzi was born and raised in Italy and spent most of her life in the fashion industry. At 56, she worked as a sales representative for a boutique specializing in women's clothing. Those who knew her well described her as reliable, thoughtful, and elegant. She approached every task with precision and grace, whether assisting a customer or caring for a loved one. Alessandra was particularly known for her deep compassion. Her sense of duty went beyond her job. She had been her father's main caregiver during his final illness, providing unwavering support until his death. This experience left her emotionally exhausted. Afterward, she became withdrawn, avoiding social interactions and hesitating to form new relationships. Alessandra's daily life centered around her mother, who lived in a care home and needed constant care. She followed a regular routine that included frequent visits to her mother and daily phone calls with her younger sister, Stefania, with whom she had a strong bond. Although Alessandra was reserved, she maintained an online presence that showcased her life. Her social media accounts featured images of family gatherings, stylish work outfits, and quiet moments with her pet. She preferred calm environments and meaningful relationships over large social events. Everything changed in the summer of 2021 when she encountered a young man named Giovanni Padovani on social media. Giovanni, aged 27, was originally from Sicily. He lived an active lifestyle as a professional football player and part-time model. His social media was lively and well-followed, showcasing training sessions, travel adventures, and insights into photo shoots. His online persona was polished and charismatic, earning him admiration from many, particularly women. His friendly, approachable demeanor suggested he was both confident and down-to-earth. Despite their age difference, Alessandra and Giovanni connected easily from the start. Giovanni was respectful and kind, showing no signs of arrogance. As time went on, their messages became more frequent, transitioning from simple greetings to deeper conversations about their lives and feelings. Their digital exchanges developed into genuine emotional connections, and they began communicating almost daily. They sharing photos, life updates, and words of support. Eventually, Giovanni planned a visit to Alessandra in Bologna, where she lived. During his visit, he took the time to understand her world without being intrusive. One gesture that stood out was his offer to visit Alessandra's mother at the care home. This thoughtful act left a lasting impression, showing that he cared not only about Alessandra but also about the life she had built and the people she cherished. In the months that followed, Giovanni kept visiting Bologna. He and Alessandra spent peaceful moments together, walking around the city, cooking, and doing errands. He joined her in her daily activities and seemed to appreciate the slower pace of her life. He appeared to genuinely care for her, capturing their moments together in photos he occasionally shared online. In private messages, he expressed his support and affection for her. To onlookers, their relationship might have seemed surprising yet meaningful, as two very different lives came together. Shortly after the new year, the sense of security began to fade. Giovanni's behavior changed. He started calling more frequently, sometimes multiple times a day, and his questions became highly specific. What had once seemed like affectionate curiosity turned into suspicion. He wanted to know who she was talking to, what she was doing, and why. Their conversations morphed into interrogations filled with doubt. Then, he began accusing her of hiding things. There was no basis for his claims. His obsession extended beyond Alessandra. He started calling Stefania directly, trying to persuade her to adopt his distorted perspective. While he initially sought her support, his behavior grew increasingly erratic. His tone shifted from persuasive to aggressive. Stefania remembered how he used to yell during phone calls, his voice loud and full of accusations. Eventually, she cut all contact with him. In contrast, Alessandra chose to stay connected, believing that the difficult times would eventually pass. She tried to avoid arguments and calm the situation down in hopes of restoring balance. However, the man who had once seemed emotionally understanding became more controlling. His jealousy took hold, and even minor social media interactions, likes, photos, comments, sparked new conflicts. He demanded explanations for every little thing. As his obsession grew, so did his need for control. He began calling her at all hours of the night, and his messages shifted from sweet to overwhelming, and often filled with frustration or regret. Alessandra's sense of peace was shattered. His unpredictable moods drained her, and his expectations were unrealistic. Yet, he continued to intrude into her life in increasingly invasive ways. In early 2022, the situation worsened for Alessandra. After one of her visits, she discovered she was locked out of her email and social media accounts. When she tried to recover them, she found that the new passwords contained clues and references linked to Giovanni, making her suspect he had accessed her computer. The more she investigated, the more alarming things became. Her WhatsApp account was connected to a foreign device, and spyware was later found on her phone. This spyware allowed Giovanni not only to monitor her but also to read her messages, check her call logs, track her location in real time. His surveillance was intentional and methodical. Alessandra's suspicions were confirmed when Giovanni started mentioning private conversations she had never disclosed to him. He was aware of who she had communicated with and when. He challenged her with distorted interpretations of her online interactions, convinced she was being unfaithful despite having no evidence. His delusions intensified, and he demanded constant proof of her location, short videos every 10 minutes showing where she was and who she was with. When Alessandra refused to comply, he erupted in anger, threatening to end their relationship, accuse her of betrayal, or overwhelm her with messages until she complied. His demeanor became cold, controlling. Alessandra felt she was no longer an equal partner in the relationship. Instead, she felt watched, judged, and trapped. Giovanni's actions took a terrifying turn when he gained access to Alessandra's home surveillance system. He even sent a screenshot of her inside her apartment to her, revealing he had been watching her in what she thought was a safe space. By mid-2022, Giovanni's behavior became overtly predatory. He not only monitored her online but also started to follow her in person. He loitered around her apartment building in Bologna, appearing at strange hours without any notice. Neighbors began to take notice. One saw him attempting to enter the building, while another spotted him on the roof. He was no longer attempting to conceal his intentions. Her life became dominated by anxiety. Giovanni had become unpredictable and dangerous. The damage began to escalate. Someone tampered with her car, cutting its wiring and disabling the lights. In her apartment, the power was cut when someone removed the fuses. These incidents were more than just vandalism, they were deliberate attempts to force her to confront him. She heard shouting, loud bangs against her walls, and items being smashed in her home. At one point, he even climbed back onto the roof, trying to break in again. What had once seemed like affection had turned into obsession. All personal boundaries had been shattered. Alessandra, who once led a calm, structured life filled with routine, was now living in a constant state of fear. Alessandra was no longer in a relationship, she felt as though she was being hunted. She started carrying pepper spray. This small change marked a significant emotional shift for someone who once felt confident and graceful. Fear began to permeate her daily life. She confided in friends and family that returning home made her anxious. Sometimes, she sought comfort at her sister Stefania's house, but this relief was always temporary, and her dog had to stay in the apartment. Leaving her dog behind was not an option for Alessandra. This emotional connection forced her to return to a dangerous environment repeatedly. Between July and August, the situation grew more volatile. Alessandra shared her experiences of intimidation and increasing aggression with Stefania. Despite her fear, she was still searching for ways to calm the situation. She avoided direct confrontations, perhaps hoping that silence or a calm demeanor would lessen the obsession. However, Giovanni reacted to her distance by becoming even more aggressive, perceiving her withdrawal as a challenge that needed to be addressed. On July 29, 2022, Alessandra took an important step to protect herself by filing a police report. She documented Giovanni's obsessive behavior, his repeated invasions of her privacy, and his increasingly erratic presence near her home. To support her claims, she provided screenshots of messages, photos of him near her residence, and detailed accounts of the stalking that had troubled her for months. Despite this evidence, the police did not take urgent measures. Days went by, and her fear continued. On August 3rd, she returned to the police with more evidence, including additional sightings and further incidents of interference. Although she reiterated her concerns, the case was still considered in its early stages. Investigators acknowledged her claims, but no protective actions were recommended. There was no restraining order, no formal warning issued, and no police presence near her building. By August 8th, she went back to the police again because the harassment had not ceased. Giovanni still showed up near her home and tried to enter the building. She kept meticulous records of each incident, including car damage, power disruptions, and break-in attempts. His messages had also become more aggressive. Yet, the official response to her situation remained unchanged. A fourth visit took place on August 13th. By that time, Alessandra was both exhausted and terrified. She felt she was being watched, followed, and monitored online. Giovanni's control over her life invaded her personal communications and daily activities. She clearly expressed her fear for her life and provided the police with direct quotes from his messages, which contained threats and psychological manipulation. One of her statements was particularly chilling: "I don't want to die." It was not just a plea, it was a stark warning. However, this was insufficient to prompt urgent action from the authorities. They cited procedural limitations, saying that they needed more witness statements. The investigators minimized the threat because there had been no physical attack, treating the case as simple harassment rather than a potential for violence. They failed to recognize the serious situation unfolding before them. Her family would later contest this failure, asserting that the warnings had been clear, consistent, and serious. The progression of events was evident. What started as an obsession with digital activities escalated into physical intimidation. Giovanni's behavior shifted from being reactive to becoming calculated, repetitive, and dangerous. The most significant evidence emerged on August 20, 2022, just 3 days before the incident. Giovanni made a checklist on his phone, which investigators later discovered in his Notes app. The list was precise, detailing items such as duct tape, a hammer, and restraints. Below the list was a written plan outlining steps to simulate a conversation, find a way to enter, and gather the necessary tools. The thoroughness of this plan eliminated any doubt about his intentions. This was not an act of impulsive anger, it was deliberate planning. On August 21, Giovanni left Sicily, where he had been involved in football-related activities, and traveled to Senegalia under the pretense of personal business. He continued his journey, arrived in Bologna on August 22. Digital records later confirmed Giovanni's movements in unsettling detail. He entered Bologna quietly, without notifying anyone, including Alessandra. After arriving, he concealed the hammer in a bush near Alessandra's apartment building, placing it strategically in a hidden corner of the residential complex. He had thoroughly scouted the area beforehand, meticulously planning each step. That same day, he climbed to the rooftop of the building and watched Alessandra's movements from above. He had been watching her for months, but this time, he was ready to act. Weeks earlier, Giovanni had made a note on his phone, dated July 2, stating, "He will end her because she ended him emotionally." In the note, he portrayed himself as a victim, claiming he had been manipulated and abandoned, pushing him to his breaking point. He was fully aware of the consequences of his actions, writing, "He knows he will end up in prison. This note will explain to the police what she did to him." His intentions were clear. He had made this decision long before he traveled north. On the evening of August 23, Alessandra arrived home, unaware that Giovanni was waiting nearby. It was just after 9 p.m., and she was on the phone with her sister, Stefania, in a normal conversation built. As Alessandra approached the entrance of the building, Giovanni emerged from his hiding place. The attack happened in seconds. Stefania, still on the phone, noticed a sudden change. Alessandra's voice shifted, followed by the unmistakable sounds of a violent struggle. In that brief moment, everything fell apart. Witnesses later reported seeing Giovanni attack her. He grabbed a hammer and struck her with such force that the hammerhead broke off the handle. However, he didn't stop there. Giovanni continued to hit her with his fists and then picked up a heavy wrought iron bench from just outside the entrance, using it to beat her repeatedly. He displayed extreme violence, delivering multiple devastating blows. Forensic reports later indicated that she had suffered over 20 traumatic injuries. Alessandra had visible injuries on her skull, chest, arms, and legs, showing evidence of a brutal assault. Her body was found with signs of blunt force trauma, severe fractures, and indications that she had been dragged on the ground. Despite the loud noises and chaos, Giovanni made no attempt to flee. When the police arrived, he was calmly sitting by the front door of the building, waiting. Officers noted his eerie composure. There was no struggle or remorse, only a chilling acceptance of his actions. Alessandra was taken to the hospital, but unfortunately, it was too late. Her injuries were severe, and she died shortly after arriving. The evidence was indisputable. His actions were deliberate, and he made no attempt to hide what he had done. The precision in his timing and the weapon's location revealed clear premeditation. Witnesses described him as quick and confident, as if he had rehearsed the act numerous times in his mind. Stefania's phone call, along with both physical and digital evidence, was essential for piecing together the timeline of events. The entire attack lasted just a few minutes, but it followed months of carefully planned psychological abuse. After his arrest, Giovanni was moved to a psychiatric facility. Initially, he chose to remain silent but later made statements blaming Alessandra for what happened, claiming she caused him emotional pain and had broken him. Investigators, however, recognized this as an attempt to mislead. The crime was clearly planned, documented, and carried out with disturbing precision. Although his defense team requested a psychiatric evaluation, court-appointed experts determined that he was fully aware of his actions. He showed obsessive and controlling behavior but did not qualify for an insanity defense. His mental state was intact, and he acted with intent. During sentencing, Giovanni spoke briefly, describing his experience as a nightmare. He told the court that if they considered him sane, he deserved the maximum penalty. He attempted to portray himself as a broken man, but the court was unaffected by his claims. His attempt to blame his victim fell apart under the weight of the evidence. On February 12, 2024, Giovanni Padovani was found guilty of stalking and the premeditated murder of Alessandra Mattuzzi. He was sentenced to life in prison. The court highlighted several aggravating factors: the cruelty of the attack, his lack of remorse, and the extensive psychological abuse that occurred before the crime. The consequences extended beyond the courtroom. Following Alessandra's death, a surge of online hostility targeted her on social media. Mean comments overwhelmed news articles, with strangers criticizing her looks, clothing, and age, as well as the age difference between her and Giovanni. Some even implied that she had provoked his actions. One of the most alarming remarks came from Donatello Alberti, was then director of Croce Bianca of Ferrara, who suggested that her appearance justified Giovanni's jealousy. The backlash was swift, resulting in Alberti's immediate removal from his position. Alessandra's family responded by filing complaints against 5 individuals for their online harassment. In an unusual move, the Bologna prosecutor's office initiated an investigation into this cyber harassment. This case set a significant legal precedent in Italy, marking one of the first times digital defamation against a deceased victim was prosecuted on such a scale. In the view of both the court and the public, Giovanni's actions were not only murder but also the final result of a prolonged campaign of control, psychological, digital, and physical, a heartbreaking example of a system that failed to intervene in time. Experts later recognized his behavior as classic Othello syndrome, a psychological condition characterized by delusional jealousy. Unlike normal jealousy, this disorder involves persistent, irrational thoughts and doubts about a partner's fidelity, along with an inability to accept reality. In severe cases, it can lead to violence, as was the tragic outcome for Alessandra, who lost her life due to this condition. Alessandra Mattuzzi's life, defined by compassion and grace, was cruelly ended on August 23, 2022, by Giovanni Padovani's calculated violence, despite her desperate pleas for protection. While his life sentence on February 12, 2024, delivered justice, it could not erase the pain of her family, particularly her sister Stefania, nor the sting of a system that failed to act on her warnings. Alessandra's legacy as a devoted daughter, sister, and professional endures, her warmth forever etched in the hearts of those she loved. Her family's fight against post-murder cyber harassment, culminating in a groundbreaking Italian legal precedent, has sparked vital conversations about digital abuse and victim blaming. Though her loss remains a stark reminder of unchecked stalking and domestic violence, Alessandra's memory fuels a call for stronger protections to ensure no one else suffers her fate. 2 days before Christmas in the peaceful town of Ellington, Connecticut, Birchview Drive was adorned with holiday decorations and wrapped gifts, creating a serene atmosphere. However, that calm was abruptly interrupted when a house alarm started ringing, prompting the police to respond quickly. When they arrived, they discovered smoke, a man bound to a chair, and something alarming in the basement. Initially, it appeared to be a burglary, but as detectives began their investigation, inconsistencies emerged. Eventually, a seemingly ordinary fitness tracker would uncover a shocking truth that no one anticipated. Connie DeBate, born on July 31, 1976, in Rockville, Connecticut, Connie was loved by all who knew her. She was raised by her parents, Kenneth and Cindy Stewart Margada, alongside her siblings Marlise, Leslie, and Keith. Connie's childhood in the peaceful towns of Vernon and Ellington was filled with deep friendships. After graduating from Ellington High in 1995, she attended the University of Connecticut and earned her degree in 1999. Connie went on to have a successful career in pharmaceutical sales in Reckitt Benckiser. Her friends remember her as kind, selfless, and vibrant, someone who brightened every room she entered. In the early 2000s, Connie met Richard DeBate, who born just 2 days before her on July 29, 1976. Richard was charming and motivated, with a background in computer network administration. They fell in love and got married on July 4, 2003. Soon after, they welcomed 2 sons, Richard R.J. and Connor. They then moved into a lovely home on Birchview Drive in Ellington. To outsiders, they appeared to be a perfect family. Connie was a caring mother, and Richard seemed to be a devoted husband. However, the reality behind closed doors was starting to show signs of trouble. On December 23, 2015, just 2 days before Christmas, a tragic event occurred. The day started like any other. At 8:10 a.m., Richard dropped the boys off at the bus stop while Connie was getting ready for a class at the local gym. Shortly after she left, Richard realized he had forgotten his work laptop and went back home. He reported that this was the moment everything changed. Richard told the police that he received a security alert on his phone about an alarm going off at their house. He emailed his boss to explain his delay and quickly returned home. When he got inside, he claimed he heard noises coming from upstairs. As he went to check, he said he encountered a masked intruder in camouflage who was holding a knife. According to Richard, chaos erupted when a man entered their home demanding money and passwords, threatening to harm his family. Just then, the garage door opened. Connie had returned early because her class was canceled. Richard shouted a warning, but the intruder ran toward Connie, leading to a struggle. Richard was thrown down the stairs and became dazed. When he regained his senses and went after them into the basement, it was already too late. He heard the gunshot. The attacker then turned on Richard, tied him to a folding chair with zip tied, cut him with a box cutter. However, Richard managed to fight back, frightened the man away. The story was dramatic, but the timeline raised some questions. Richard reported that the attack occurred around 9:05 a.m., but the first 911 call was made over an hour later, at 10:21. When first responders arrived, they noticed smoke in the air and the front door slightly ajar. They followed a trail of blood from the basement to the kitchen, where they discovered Richard, partially restrained and lying face down. However, there was no evidence of the supposed intruder. Investigators conducted a thorough search of the home, taking photographs of everything, including Richard still tied to the chair. As they examined the scene more closely, they found themselves with increasing questions. Initially, it appeared to be the aftermath of a violent struggle, but some details were inconsistent. Richard had zip-tied only on his left wrist and ankle, his injuries were minimal, and the location of his wound raised suspicions. Meanwhile, the real tragedy unfolded in the basement boiler room, where police discovered Connie. She had sustained 2 fatal gunshot wounds, one to her abdomen and another to the back of her head. Unfortunately, there was no hope for her. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Investigators quickly recognized that this was not just a standard home invasion case. They dispatched service dog units to try to track the intruder. Surprisingly, the dogs focused their attention on one individual, Richard. One of the dogs discovered Richard's wallet in the yard, which had likely been discarded by the escaping intruder. However, there was no scent trail leading away from the house. Instead, the dogs followed a path directly to the ambulance where Richard was being treated for what turned out to be only minor injuries. From that moment on, Richard's story started to fall apart. At Hartford Hospital, detectives questioned him about what happened that morning. Richard stuck to his story that an intruder shot Connie, but when they asked for more details, his account started to change. His timeline became unclear. At one point, Richard said he left the house before Connie, but later he couldn't remember who left first. He also altered his description of returning home. Initially, he claimed he heard no sounds upstairs, but then he said he went upstairs after seeing a bedroom light and found a man going through a closet. There were several inconsistencies in Richard's account. Initially, he stated that he was pushed down the stairs, but later changed his story to say he fell. He described a struggle between Connie and the intruder over a gun, claiming the intruder overpowered her and shot her. Richard also claimed that the basement was completely dark, making it difficult to see. However, if he had been knocked unconscious as he stated, how could he remember so many details? Additionally, the physical evidence did not support Richard's story. He claimed he crawled up the stairs while still tied to a chair to call for help, but his injuries were only on the left side and the front of his legs, areas that were easily accessible with his right hand. There was another issue to consider. There was hardly any blood trail leading from the basement to the kitchen. Investigators found only a few dry drops of blood in the kitchen, which raised questions. If Richard had truly dragged himself upstairs, he would have left a more obvious trail. Even more concerning was what they didn't discover. There was no evidence that Richard had approached Connie's body after the shooting. The blood around her remained undisturbed, suggesting that no one attempted to assist her. Detectives also looked at the supposed entry point, a basement window, which showed no signs of forced entry. Instead, the locks were found removed from the inside and placed on the sill. For someone to enter in that manner, they would need to pry open the window without damaging the frame or triggering the alarm system, which seemed unlikely. When asked more questions, Richard described his marriage as mostly positive. He acknowledged that Connie had been going through emotional challenges, showing signs of depression and occasional anger, which was unusual for her since she is generally warm and optimistic. He indicated that she was gradually improving. However, when asked if investigators would find any relationship problems, Richard provided a confusing answer, saying both yes and no. Richard explained that he and Connie both wanted another child, but medical issues had prevented them from conceiving again. As detectives investigated further, Richard shared surprising information. He revealed that he and Connie had made a plan for him to have a child with another woman. Richard claimed that artificial insemination was too costly, so they opted for a more personal arrangement. He mentioned that it was Connie's idea for the three of them, Richard, Connie, and the woman, to co-parent the child. To Richard, this seemed like a modern way to achieve their shared dream. However, investigators found his story puzzling. When detectives asked Richard whether Connie was aware of the woman's pregnancy, he avoided answering the question. Then, a crucial discovery was made: Connie and the woman had never actually met. This fact fundamentally weakened Richard's story. As more details emerged, the reality became clearer. Connie hadn't agreed to anything, and the woman's pregnancy was unplanned. It turned out Richard was hiding much more than just an affair. Later that day, investigators found this woman, and her account changed everything. She acknowledged knowing Richard was married but believed he was in the process of getting a divorce. Richard had told her that his marriage was over, that he and Connie were just waiting for the right moment to separate. On June 18, 2015, the woman found out she was pregnant. She chose to inform Richard. He responded with a false claim that he had already hired a divorce lawyer. By December, their relationship was still strong, and they were even planning a romantic getaway to Vermont just a week before Connie's death. During that trip, they discussed when to reveal their relationship, and Richard suggested they wait until after Christmas to do so. When the investigation focused on those close to Connie, a different story emerged. Her friends, the ones she usually confided in, had no idea about Richard's lover, the child, or the alleged agreement Richard claimed they had made. They insisted that if Connie had known about these things, she would have shared that information with them, as she always did. Richard privately shared his feelings with close friends, revealing that he loved his lover but was worried about losing Connie. However, the love triangle he was trying to keep hidden was on the verge of being exposed. Investigators had suspected from the outset that Richard might be linked to his wife's murder, although they kept their doubts to themselves. Publicly, it was believed that a masked intruder had broken into their home, killed Connie, and left Richard injured. Friends and neighbors sympathized with Richard, initially accepting his displayed grief without question, but investigators continued to pursue leads. One potential suspect was a contractor whom Connie and Richard had taken to small claims court over a dispute regarding home renovations. Connie had reportedly been fearful of this contractor, and her car had been vandalized twice in 2015, incidents she suspected were related to him. As a precaution, they had improved their home security system and acquired firearms. Throughout the investigation, the contractor's name frequently surfaced in interviews as a significant lead, but it soon became clear that he had a strong alibi for the day of the murder and did not match the description of the masked figure Richard provided. That lead quickly went cold. As investigators focused on Richard, others noticed his unusual behavior. His response to Connie's death was not typical for a grieving husband. He seemed off, his account of events kept changing, and his expressions of sorrow seemed insincere. The facade of a perfect family was already broken, and now the reality behind it was starting to emerge, revealing one contradiction and one deception at a time. In the days after Connie's tragic death, Richard's actions puzzled those around him. One of his first posts on a neighborhood forum was a seemingly casual question: "What's the best place for takeout?" This seemed shocking for someone whose wife had just been murdered. However, as investigators looked more closely into the couple's lives, deeper issues emerged. They were facing significant financial difficulties, spending much more than they earned, with much of the strain falling on Connie. She had shared with a friend her thoughts about leaving Richard and had even saved a private note on her phone titled "Reasons I Want to Divorce," where she documented Richard's dishonesty, emotional neglect, inadequate parenting, and selfish behavior. Investigators soon discovered a money trail. They found 2 life insurance policies, each valued at nearly $500,000. Although Richard's policy had expired because he didn't make payments, Connie's policy was still active. Remarkably, Richard filed a claim just 5 days after her death. A month later, he received another $75,000 from her employer. This shocking discovery revealed that the man who professed to be mourning her was already profiting from her death. Over the next year, detectives meticulously built Connie's case. They analyzed phone records, financial statements, emails, and security logs. The key breakthrough came from something often overlooked: Connie's Fitbit. The data was incriminating. The fitness tracker indicated she was alive and active long after Richard claimed she had been killed. On December 23rd, she woke up at 7:52 a.m. Her activity paused while she drove to the gym, which was confirmed by surveillance footage. She returned home around 9:20 a.m., and from 9:37 to 9:43, she was inactive, likely resting. After that, her tracker recorded movement, even social media activity from her phone. At 10:05 a.m., her Fitbit showed its last recorded movement, while Richard had stated she died around 9:05. This data clearly proved she was still alive an hour later, and it was the kind of evidence that no alibi could dismiss. On April 14, 2017, police arrested Richard DeBate, charging him with the murder of Connie, tampering with evidence, and making false statements. Although Richard pleaded not guilty, his arrest shocked the community in Ellington. To many, he appeared to be a grieving husband rather than a murderer. Prosecutors put together a 50-page affidavit detailing the case against him, which included his extramarital affair, insurance money, inconsistencies in his story, and the Fitbit data that contradicted his account of events. However, the justice process was slow. The case experienced 2 delays, and it wasn't until April 5, 2022, almost 6.5 years later, that the trial finally commenced. When it did, the courtroom was filled with people, including 600 exhibits and 130 witnesses. Connie's story had gained national attention and was often referred to as the Fitbit murder. The defense aimed to create uncertainty concerning the case. They highlighted the presence of unidentified DNA found in multiple areas of the house, suggesting that another person may have been there. They also pointed out that the amount of gunshot residue on Richard was minimal, arguing that it was too low for someone who had just fired a gun. However, the prosecution firmly countered these claims. They asserted that the DNA evidence did not indicate another suspect but served to divert attention from the main issue. Regarding the gunshot residue, they explained that the test was conducted several hours later, allowing Richard the opportunity to wash his hands, clean up, and potentially tamper with the scene. The prosecution maintained that Richard had a clear motive: he was under pressure, his lover was pregnant, Connie wanted to leave, and Richard's seemingly perfect life was about to unravel. The pressure is mounting. The baby is coming, and the defendant's worst fears are about to be realized. After a 5-week trial, the jury took only 3 hours to reach their verdict. On May 10, 2022, Richard Debate, 46, was found guilty on all charges. During the sentencing, the judge was straightforward. She described the crime as premeditated, heinous, and incomprehensible, sentencing him to 65 years, just 1 year short of the maximum possible sentence. He is currently housed at McDougall Walker Prison in Suffield, Connecticut. For Connie's family, the long ordeal is finally over. The judge took a moment to remember Connie, not just as a victim, but as a vibrant woman, a loving mother, and a devoted friend. With justice now served, Connie's story will always be remembered. Richard maintains his innocence to this day, and his lawyers continue to appeal his conviction. As recently as October 2024, local NBC Connecticut reported that Richard's lawyers argued their client did not receive a fair trial, citing questions posed by the state prosecutor, including inquiries that asked Richard to respond to the testimonies of other witnesses. However, Richard remains behind bars, convicted of murdering his wife to cover up an affair. He is not scheduled for release until 2087, although his lawyers continue to pursue appeals to try to shorten his sentence. No decision has been made regarding Richard's appeal from October 2024, which could potentially review his conviction and sentence. The Connecticut Supreme Court upheld the conviction on March 11, 2025. In July 2009, 55-year-old Gloria Huerta Marmolejo vanished without a trace from her home in El Paso, Texas. The day before her disappearance, she had unexpectedly returned from a trip and discovered something in her house that she had likely suspected for a long time. Just hours later, all contact with her was lost. No calls, no messages, no clues. When her son suggested that she might have just gone away for a while, the rest of the family grew concerned. Gloria was not the type to leave without telling anyone. A few days later, her car was found abandoned, and her belongings had been neatly left at home. What started as a typical missing person case soon revealed a chilling truth about long-hidden relationships, a double life, and a betrayal that turned deadly. El Paso is located in the far western part of Texas, right on the border with Mexico. It's known for its mix of cultures, its tense border atmosphere, and its higher crime rates. Despite its rough reputation, generations of families have built their lives there, holding tightly to traditions, loyalty, and the Sunday gatherings that bring everyone together. It was here, on July 28, 1955, that Gloria Marmolejo was born. She grew up in a large, close-knit family of Mexican heritage, where support, family ties, and deep loyalty were passed down through the years. In the early 1970s, Gloria met Armando Marmolejo. He won her over quickly, and by October 11, 1975, they were married. Gloria poured her heart into the relationship, never allowing anyone to speak poorly about her husband and always ready to stand by his side. They had 2 sons, Manny first, then David a few years later. At first, their family life seemed like a model of stability, a house, sons, holidays, and day-to-day life together. However, after David was born, Armando took a job that supposedly required constant travel. He was home less and less until he seemed to disappear entirely. No one really knew what he was doing or where he was going. His business trips were shrouded in secrecy, even relatives were left in the dark. By the time David turned about 6, their father was rarely around. In April 1995, Gloria made the divorce official. Armando moved to a different state, cut off contact with Manny and David. Gloria didn't let this break her spirit. She accepted the situation and focused on raising her sons. According to her brother, she had a different relationship with each of them, tailored to their personalities and needs. As Manny and David grew older, they began to drift apart. Each took his own path and followed his own interests, which was a natural part of life. Manny settled into a steady routine, while David frequently changed his priorities and directions. Gloria, after years of pouring herself into family life, eventually refused to sink into loneliness. At 50, she made a big change. She left her job of 27 years, went back to school, and earned a degree in management. She became a real estate agent, a job that provided her not just with an income, but also with a sense of purpose. It offered her flexible hours and the chance to be in control of her own time. Life eventually settled into a comfortable routine. The house where Gloria lived was tidy, well kept, and surrounded by a garden she loved to care for. She spent her time reading, enjoying the fresh air, and seemed to have found the peace she had always longed for. But everything changed suddenly. One of Gloria's neighbors, an elderly man she had known for years, became seriously ill. His adult son came to take care of him. After the son's arrival, Gloria began noticing some odd things happening. She often saw someone watching her from behind the bushes that bordered their yards. The man would hide, never getting too close, but his stare felt invasive and unsettling. Once, she even saw him holding what looked like a phone or camera, clearly recording her. This wasn't a one-time incident, it happened repeatedly. The sense of safety Gloria had always felt in her home was gone. She tried not to panic, but the tension kept building. Despite everything, she never went to the police. Part of her held back out of compassion for her sick neighbor. She worried that involving the authorities might make things worse. Another part of her felt it was better to wait, to observe, and to avoid making any sudden moves. Rather than contacting the police, she decided to call her brother Mark. She explained the situation clearly and shared her anxiety about it. She asked him to stay connected in case things got worse. While she didn't want to create unnecessary drama, she thought it was important for him to be informed. After that call, the thought of moving began to occupy her mind more frequently. Her sons moved out a long time ago. Manny is now living in Phoenix, and David has also moved to a new location. Although life in El Paso had always seemed stable and familiar, it was starting to feel uncertain. However, moving would mean leaving the home where she had rebuilt her life after her divorce, raised her sons, and rediscovered herself. It was not just a house, it was a part of her story. Leaving felt like relinquishing her past, whereas staying meant enduring ongoing anxiety. Over time, her thoughts of moving evolved into a quiet certainty, signaling that significant changes were approaching. To truly understand what happened, we need to look back at David, Gloria's younger son, during his early childhood. From a young age, David stood out from his classmates, not because he was academically inclined or well-behaved, but because he had a talent for getting into trouble. He found school uninteresting, disliked doing chores, and resisted any attempts to guide him. Unlike his brother Manny, who loved sports and eagerly embraced learning, David chose a different path. He was carefree, ignored school rules, and was always preoccupied with girls. David was restless, never committed to any activity for long. His interests were superficial and constantly changing. It was evident that his main priorities were his appearance, popularity, and the attention he received from girls. Relatives noted that even in his teenage years, he enjoyed being the focus of everyone's attention. He knew how to leverage his good looks, confidence, and charm. While his classmates were still learning about dating, David behaved as if he had everything under control. He felt entitled to attention, viewed girls as just another aspect of his life. This sense of entitlement and inflated self-esteem became defining characteristics of his identity. At the age of 16, he began dating a girl, who became his official girlfriend. However, he still spent time with other girls. To his family and friends, he presented his girlfriend as his serious partner, while secretly, he was seeing other people. She was 2 years younger than him and became pregnant at just 15. This unexpected situation changed everything. Suddenly, David felt he needed to take responsibility. He dropped out of school, found a job, and proposed to her. His decision surprised everyone, even Gloria. Despite her initial shock, Gloria supported David through this difficult time. She accepted his girlfriend as part of the family and quickly offered help with the new baby. After the birth of their first son, they welcomed 3 more children. Gloria played a vital role, helping to raise her grandchildren, managing the household, and providing financial support. The young family lived with her, and once again, Gloria became the center of the home. It felt like she was experiencing motherhood all over again. This time as a grandmother, she dedicated herself to the role with the same passion. Despite his family's encouragement, David struggled to find stability in his life. He changed jobs frequently, never staying in one place for long and showing little desire to advance in any career. At one point, he received a job offer from a construction company in Phoenix, Arizona. This opportunity seemed appealing, as it offered better pay and a chance to reunite with his older brother, Manny, who was already living there. Additionally, their father, Armando, had contacted him after years of no communication, and he, too, was living in Phoenix. The decision to move happened quickly. His partner and the kids joined him. For David, this was a chance to start over, improve his finances, strengthen his relationship with Manny, and possibly reconnect with Armando, something he never thought would be possible. Once in Arizona, David was surrounded by family again, despite the changes. Armando was now living with a partner and raising two younger kids, Jonathan and Mariah. Mariah looked up to her older brothers, especially David. To her, he seemed mature, confident, and like a hero she admired. She spent a lot of time at their house, playing with her nephews and helping out. His partner, busy taking care of 4 kids, appreciated the extra help. The family bonds appeared to be getting stronger. During this time, hidden issues were starting to surface beneath the appearance of normal life. Mariah was becoming more involved in David's daily routine, and no one realized how harmful that relationship could be. Mariah, David's younger half-sister, quickly became a constant presence in his life. However, as Mariah matured, David's partner began to notice unsettling changes in David's behavior around Mariah. While everything appeared fine on the surface, she felt that something wasn't right. Their interactions, the way they spoke to each other, the small gestures, their closeness, seemed excessive. Although it could be dismissed as family affection, she couldn't shake her growing unease. She hesitated to make any assumptions, thinking that maybe her concerns were just a result of her own stress and exhaustion. When David got a job offer in Hawaii, he moved there by himself. When Mariah was around 15 or 16, David invited her to spend the summer in Hawaii. At first, everyone thought it was a normal family trip with her brother, his partner, and their children. However, after a few weeks, David's partner began to notice unsettling signs. She saw the way David and Mariah looked at each other and spoke. These little things didn't feel right. What started as a vague concern gradually turned into real suspicion. One day, she walked in on them in the bedroom. Disturbed by what she witnessed, she immediately called Gloria. For Gloria, this news was shocking and heartbreaking. The idea that something inappropriate might be happening between her son and his young half-sister was unbearable. She demanded that it must end immediately, and Mariah was sent back home to Texas right away. The incident did not become public and had no formal repercussions, but it changed the dynamics within the family. Gloria lost trust in her son. Although she tried to act normally, she recognized that this was not just a simple mistake, it felt like a significant threat. The bond of trust was broken. The once strong family ties began to deteriorate quickly. A serious argument erupted between mother and son. Gloria expressed her disapproval openly, criticized David's actions, demanded he cut off all contact with Mariah, and made it clear she wouldn't accept anything like this again. David denied everything, claiming there was no relationship and accusing others of blowing things out of proportion. However, Gloria did not believe him. Her life experiences, cautious nature, and that unique maternal instinct told her that this situation was much more serious than David was willing to acknowledge. After Mariah returned to Texas, the family faced another crisis. David was involved in a serious motorcycle accident on one of Hawaii's winding roads. He lost control of his bike and unfortunately had to have one of his legs amputated. When Gloria found out, she rushed to Hawaii, putting aside any previous disagreements. In that moment, all conflicts were forgotten. Her son needed her, and she responded like any caring mother would. During David's recovery, Gloria stayed with him in the hospital, helping him adapt to his new physical limitations and providing unwavering support. David shared with others that his mother never left his side, always holding his hand, encouraging him, and doing everything possible to help him feel complete despite his loss. After a long rehabilitation, Gloria suggested that David come back to El Paso with her. David agreed, as his relationship with his partner was over and he had little contact with his sons. Returning to his mother appeared to be his only choice. However, Gloria had one strict condition: he must have no contact with Mariah. If he complied, she promised to keep everything that had happened a secret and allow him a chance to start anew. David accepted the condition, and they went back to Texas. Gloria resumed her daily routines, helping her son adjust to his new life, while staying watchful. On the surface, things seemed stable. David appeared calm, contributing around the house and not causing any concerns. After enduring so much chaos, Gloria finally felt like she was regaining control. The neighbor who had been watching her from the bushes still lived next door, which made her uncomfortable. However, now that David was back home, she felt more secure. Even with the tension between them, just having a man around made her feel less exposed. It seemed like the worst was behind her, but her worries lingered. Deep down, she sensed that the situation with Mariah might not be resolved. While everything appeared calm on the outside, Gloria couldn't shake the feeling that a threat was still present. She remained vigilant, scrutinizing every encounter and doubting whether her son had genuinely changed. When David's condition improved and he could care for himself, Gloria decided to take a short trip. Her older son, Manny, had been inviting her to visit him in Phoenix for a long time, and now that her younger son seemed stable, she agreed to go. Before leaving, she asked David to look after the house. At first glance, everything appeared to be fine. He stayed in El Paso, maintained the house, and seemed to follow her instructions. However, while she was in Arizona, Gloria's unease grew. The doubts she had tried to ignore became more persistent. She confided in her brother Mark and asked him to check on David to make sure everything was all right and that Mariah wasn't visiting him. Mark promised to check in, but based on her feelings, Gloria suspected he hadn't actually done much to follow through. Gloria's worries continued to grow until she made the sudden decision to return home unexpectedly. When she arrived, she was shocked by what she found. The house, which had always been clean and organized, was now a total mess, with dirt and clutter everywhere. The most alarming discovery was the locked door to her bedroom, which had a new lock she had never seen before. Anxiously, Gloria called David to ask what was happening. He responded that he was at the movies and would return soon. She waited for him. When David finally came home, they got into a heated argument. Gloria accused him of being disrespectful, breaking his promises, and allowing the house to fall into disarray. David tried to defend himself, saying he would help her pack for a trip back to Phoenix and that he had gone back to the movies afterward. Later that evening, on July 25th, Manny began to feel anxious. He hadn't heard from his mother since she left his house that morning. Despite calling and texting her, he received no replies. He then tried to contact David. Initially, David didn't answer, but as midnight approached, he finally returned Manny's call. David informed Manny that Gloria had come by, they had an argument, and he helped her pack. She likely returned to Phoenix. However, as the night turned into morning, Gloria still hadn't appeared at Manny's place or reached out to any family members. Her phone was off, and there were no messages from her. By the next day, July 26th, it was clear that something was seriously wrong. Manny called David again, but David seemed distant and unhelpful, repeatedly claiming he didn't know anything. His lack of concern was unsettling, making Manny even more convinced that something was amiss. By July 27th, Gloria had been missing for 2 days. Manny contacted everyone he could think of, family, friends, and neighbors, but no one had seen her. It felt like she had disappeared completely. Eventually, he decided to call the police, but they told him that the missing person report needed to come from the last person who saw her, which was David. Soon after, other family members, including Gloria's mother and her brother Conrad, arrived at the house. David greeted them at the door, appearing calm and somewhat indifferent. After much convincing, he finally agreed to go to the police and file a report about Gloria's disappearance. On July 28, Manny and his wife arrived in El Paso to find something was wrong. As soon as Manny entered the house, he noticed that Gloria's suitcase was in the corner, untouched, and her makeup bag had not been opened. It became clear that she hadn't gone anywhere. She had vanished unexpectedly, without packing or informing anyone. David's explanation about helping her pack didn't make sense since her belongings were still there. Additionally, his behavior was unsettling. He seemed calm and detached, not asking questions or showing any signs of concern. Manny pressed David for details about the last time he saw their mother. David showed Manny some text messages from Gloria, in which she asked him to unlock the door for her. Then, unexpectedly, he added a new part to his story. He claimed that after leaving the house, he went to a party at a woman's house, and later that night, went to a club with another woman. He said he didn't return home until around 3 a.m. During their conversation about their mother, David made a comment that raised alarm. He said he worried they might find traces of his DNA on her. After all, he hugged and kissed her. This statement was confusing, especially since Gloria was reported missing, and no one had suggested anything more serious. The following day, July 29th, local detectives brought in the family members for questioning. David repeated his story, but this time he altered some details. He no longer mentioned going to the movies. Instead, he said he spent the whole evening at the party. A woman confirmed his presence, stating he arrived between 7 and 8 p.m., stayed until midnight, and seemed tense. She did not mention anything about him going to a club with another woman. On that same day, troubling news emerged. Gloria's car was discovered abandoned near an elementary school in El Paso. Her personal items, purse, keys, and phone, were still inside, but there was no sign of Gloria. This changed the investigation from a missing person case to a potential crime, and the Violent Crimes Unit took over. Officers began canvassing the neighborhood. Several residents reported seeing Gloria's car leave the garage on the morning of July 26th. One witness was confident that she had seen Gloria driving. However, another neighbor had a different account. He stated that he saw a young, light-skinned woman with short blonde hair behind the wheel, and he noticed what appeared to be a man's silhouette in the back seat. This was the first solid evidence suggesting that someone other than Gloria had driven her car after she disappeared. The police searched the house and found bloodstains in the garage, mostly on the door of a built-in cabinet. Although there wasn't a large amount, it appeared fresh, leading them to classify the house as a potential crime scene. This discovery prompted detectives to question David more intensively. His accounts were inconsistent, with discrepancies even in basic facts. He struggled with the timeline, frequently changed the order of events, and introduced new details each time he spoke. Throughout the questioning, he remained unusually calm, showing no concern or asking questions about the investigation, which raised suspicions. The police analyzed the blood samples and began collecting DNA from family members. Manny noticed his brother's strange behavior and couldn't stop thinking about Mariah. He felt uneasy about the close relationship between her and David, leading him to urge the police to consider Mariah as a possible suspect, especially given David's partner's previous comments. Investigators examined cell phone data, which revealed important findings. Records show that David made a call between 1:30 and 1:40 a.m. on the night of July 25th to 26th. His phone was located almost 4 miles away from where Gloria's car was found. Additionally, there were several calls between David's and Mariah's phones from 5:30 to 6 a.m., both incoming and outgoing. These inconsistencies, combined with witness statements, changing stories, and digital evidence, suggested that Gloria's disappearance was not an accident and that she did not leave on her own. The investigation had clearly turned into a criminal case, with David and Mariah being the last known individuals to have seen Gloria alive. On July 31st, a woman walking her dog found Gloria's body in the desert in Santa Teresa, New Mexico. The body had started to decompose. Her head was covered with 2 layers, first with plastic and then with a paper bag. Her left leg and arms were also wrapped in plastic. Investigators quickly realized that whoever committed this crime attempted to conceal any biological evidence, suggesting a deliberate act rather than a spontaneous one. The medical examiner determined that Gloria died from suffocation. Her broken larynx indicated that significant physical force was used, showing that the perpetrator had complete control over the situation. This was not a reckless act, it was a calculated and brutal attack. Lab results started to arrive, revealing that the blood samples found in Gloria's garage belonged to Mariah. This discovery made Mariah a key figure in the investigation. Gloria's brother, Mark, informed detectives that before Gloria vanished, she had confided in him her suspicions about David and Mariah having an inappropriate relationship, which she strongly disapproved of. Mariah and David were questioned about their whereabouts on the night of July 25th to 26th. They stated they had spent the entire night together, but cell phone records contradicted this. David's phone made a call at 1:37 a.m., which was almost 4 miles away from where Gloria's body was found later. Additionally, there were calls between David and Mariah at 5:30 and 6 a.m. If they were together the whole night, why did they call each other? Under pressure from investigators, Mariah started to change her story. Eventually, she was offered a deal. She would receive full immunity if she provided the complete truth about what happened. She accepted the offer. Mariah explained that Gloria unexpectedly returned home and discovered her there. This led to a heated argument between Gloria and her son. Gloria insisted that Mariah leave at once and never return. At that moment, Mariah claimed that David lost his temper and became violent, resulting in Gloria's tragic death. Following this, David contacted Mariah to ask for her assistance in covering up the incident. They cleaned the scene to eliminate any evidence and placed Gloria's body in her car, then drove it out of the city. Mariah also confessed that the blood found in a garage belonged to her, as it was from a prior altercation with David. When David buried Gloria, Mariah stated that she was present nearby. Her confession was a crucial turning point in the investigation. On September 4, 2009, David was arrested and faced charges of causing serious harm, hiding evidence, and destroying evidence. The trial began in May 4, 2010. Mariah, who had been given immunity, testified against him. She revealed that their relationship began when she was 14 and he was 29. A startling detail was that she had a child with David, who was later put up for adoption. This information surprised even those who were aware of their relationship. Many family members were unaware of the complete story. Some remained silent while others never suspected anything wrong. Investigators provided more evidence, but no DNA from David was found on Gloria's body. The defense claimed that the case relied on circumstantial evidence. David remained calm and composed in court, occasionally becoming emotional, but consistently insisted on his innocence. The first trial ended without a clear verdict because the jury was unable to reach a unanimous decision. To prevent local bias, it was decided to move the trial to San Antonio. July 10, 2010, David Marmolejo was charged with murdering his mother. In 2011, resulting in David being found guilty and sentenced to 54 years in prison. However, the situation continued to evolve. David was extradited to Arizona in December 2016 to face the crimes he committed against escort service. He is awaiting retrial at the Maricopa County Jail, where he has been held since December 8, 2016. David Marmolejo now faces 29 charges, including 15 counts of abuse assault, 4 counts of armed robbery with a deadly weapon, 4 counts of aggravated assault, 2 counts of abuse, and 4 counts of kidnapping. He initially denied the charges, but his story began to change when a Phoenix detective presented him with evidence. Marmolejo has denied the abuse assault but admitted to picking up approximately 11 escort services during his time in Phoenix. After his arrest in 2006, Marmolejo was reportedly charged with 4 counts of kidnapping, 4 counts of armed robbery, and 10 counts of abuse assault. However, the case was dismissed because 3 of the women could not be found, and the 4th refused to cooperate. Enjoying her freedom, she went to live with her mother. To avoid a life sentence, He made a plea deal with prosecutors, admitting guilt to 6 of the charges while the others were dismissed. Gloria dedicated her life to raising her sons and did everything she could to pull David back from the edge. In the end, he was the one who destroyed everything she had worked so hard to build. The tragic loss of Gloria Huerta Marmolejo revealed the devastating consequences of betrayal within a family she fought to protect. Her unwavering dedication to her sons, especially David, could not shield her from his descent into violence. Convicted of her murder and facing further charges in Arizona, David's actions shattered the bonds Gloria cherished. Her story serves as a haunting reminder that even the strongest love cannot always mend a broken soul, leaving behind a legacy of grief and a call for vigilance against hidden dangers in those closest to us. On April 4, 2015, emergency services received a disturbing call from a local resident. A frightened man reported to the dispatcher that he went into his friend's living room to turn on the lights and check on him. However, when he went upstairs to the second floor, he found blood everywhere. The caller said everything was covered in blood, and his injured friend was not breathing. When the police arrived, they were shocked to discover the brutal murder of 59-year-old Charles Taylor in the unincorporated community of Montgomery County. The crime scene was horrifying. Blood was splattered on the carpet, the walls, and the sofa where Charles lay, completely soaked in it. The violent nature of the crime suggested deep anger. The attackers seemed determined to not only kill Charles but also to inflict as much pain as possible by stabbing him repeatedly with a sharp knife. The investigation of the house revealed no signs of forced entry, indicating that the perpetrator was familiar with the residents and acted quickly. The forensic medical examination determined that Charles died from blunt force trauma to the back of his head, along with 31 stab wounds. Charles was known as a kind and generous individual. He had a strong relationship with his adult son. He cherished his 2 grandchildren and daughter-in-law, Amanda Taylor. This is the image of the family that people often see, leading them to believe everything was well. However, was this truly the reality within the Taylor family? The initial investigation progressed slowly because the police had few leads. They started by looking into Charles's friends and acquaintances but found no one who had a motive to harm him. Soon, a theory emerged suggesting that the culprit might be a family member of Taylor. Investigators caught a break when a crime blogger came forward with photos of Amanda Taylor taking selfies next to Charles's lifeless body. As a result, she was added to the wanted list. Amanda Barbara Nicole Taylor was born on March 27, 1991, in Christiansburg, Virginia. There is limited information about her childhood, but it was difficult because both of her parents were incarcerated. Amanda faced many personal challenges as a young girl. Her involvement in crime began after she met Mariah Roebuck. The two of them frequently got into trouble together. On October 23, 2005, when they were only 12 years old, Amanda and Mariah stole a car and ran away from home, leading to charges of unauthorized use of a motor vehicle. In early April 2006, Amanda was charged with disorderly conduct at her middle school for loudly expressing her hatred for the school and its students, including making threats. This incident was much more serious than typical teenage behavior and is just a small part of Amanda's legal troubles. In 9th grade, she began dating Rex Taylor, who was 2 years her senior. They shared the same birthday, March 27th, which they saw as a meaningful connection. Amanda dropped out of school when she found out she was pregnant. She and Rex got married and had a son, but becoming a mother did not curb Amanda's criminal behavior. Amanda Taylor's married life was marked by numerous legal troubles. Her police record expanded significantly with reports of another attempted escape after stealing a vehicle, a conviction for alcohol possession, several domestic disputes, and a charge for holding a controlled substance. Her husband, Rex Taylor, also came from a troubled background. Although they were devoted to each other, Rex faced serious challenges with addiction and depression, having been addicted to banned substance since he was 15. They had a daughter. At one point, it seemed Amanda had turned her life around, becoming a dedicated mother and wife. This was in contrast to many young American women who expressed themselves through piercings, tattoos, and social media selfies. However, Amanda and Rex's relationship was far from typical. They obsessively studied the lives of infamous serial criminals and even corresponded with them while they were in prison. Amanda began to fantasize about joining the ranks of criminals herself, but before she could pursue that dark path, tragedy struck. Their marriage was complicated by Amanda's fears of Rex's infidelity. In April 2014, they separated. Rex returned to the family home, where he resumed using banned substance. Tragically, 4 months later, his lifeless body was found in a shed on their property. He had taken his own life on the day of their child's 7th birthday. After Amanda's husband passed away, she occasionally stayed with her mother and her friend Mariah. During her time with Mariah, she also formed a friendship with Sean Ball, a member of the Roebuck family. On March 27, 2015, which was her birthday and her late husband's birthday, Amanda visited Rex's grave and attempted to take her own life. Fortunately, she was saved and admitted to a psychiatric hospital due to her troubling thoughts and actions that posed a risk to herself and others. Despite her mother wanting her to stay for a longer period of treatment, Amanda was released back home shortly after. Once Amanda returned home, her mental state deteriorated further. As a result, Mariah and her husband decided that it was best for Amanda to move out. They also asked Sean Ball to leave, as he had developed strong feelings for Amanda. Feeling abandoned by her friends during this challenging time, Amanda began to entertain dark thoughts about killing. This disturbing mindset was influenced by her late husband, Rex Taylor, whom she wanted to honor and make proud. Amanda believed that fulfilling this twisted sense of duty required taking someone's life. Rex had a fascination with serial killers and had even formed close connections with some during his lifetime. Imagine stepping outside your house one morning to check your mailbox and discovering an envelope addressed to you from a famous serial criminal who was caught in 1980. Inside the envelope, you would feel relieved to find a birthday card for your young child and a handwritten note. Some might say that receiving such a message is worrying. Regardless, for most people, getting anything in the mail from a serial criminal would be unsettling, but not for the Taylor family. Rex's behavior and his readiness to communicate with known serial criminals, along with Amanda's fascination with crime, have been underscored by disturbing details found in her past social media posts. In multiple posts, Amanda praised mass murderers and their violent acts, specifically mentioning Timothy McVeigh, who orchestrated the largest terrorist attack in U.S. history, as well as Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris, the shooters responsible for the Columbine High School massacre. She expressed a desire to emulate these cruel criminals and chose to embark on a criminal path herself. On April 4, 2015, Amanda went to Charles's home in Montgomery County, Virginia, with Sean, who had picked her up in his car earlier that day. Together, the two purchased a bayonet-shaped knife. They also brought a tire iron that Sean had hidden in his pants, along with several guns, including 2 pistols and a rifle. These weapons had been stolen from Sean's parents' home. Amanda later admitted that they had gone to Charles's home with the intention of killing him. During the visit, the conversation turned to Rex Taylor, Amanda's late husband, who had committed to end one's own life in August 2014. Amanda blamed Charles for Rex's end one's own life, believing that he was responsible for Rex's banned substance abuse, which had become particularly problematic in the 2 years prior to his death. While Charles was sitting on the sofa, Amanda began stabbing him repeatedly while standing over him. Charles reached for the knife. As he did so, Sean swung the tire iron and struck him 5 or 6 times, while Amanda continued to stab him. Charles's autopsy later revealed that he had been stabbed 31 times and had suffered blunt force trauma to the head. Some of the stab wounds were so forceful that they completely penetrated his neck and arms. For Amanda, this was a personal act of revenge. She finally stopped when her anger began to fade, and the room was covered in blood. However, she went even further by taking a selfie next to his body and sharing it on her social media accounts. Later that day, Amanda's mother received a troubling phone call from an unknown number. To her shock, it was Amanda's voice on the line, crying as she expressed her deep love for her mother and how much she appreciated everything her mom had done for her. Amidst her tears, Amanda admitted that she had done something very serious. Sensing the urgency of the situation, Her mother pleaded for her to come home. However, Amanda declined. The authorities were taken aback by her social media posts, which suggested she was surprisingly proud of her actions related to the incident. In hopes of addressing the situation quickly, the police issued an arrest warrant for her. However, by that time, Amanda and Sean had already fled. They weren't just fleeing, they were looking for their next victim. After Amanda committed her first crime, which she believed was flawless, she felt an uncontrollable urge to keep killing. At a gas station, they took out cash, filled the car with gas, and headed towards Tennessee. Sean urged Amanda to pause and hide for a while, but having experienced the thrill of violence, Amanda was set on committing another crime. They bought ammunition at a sporting goods store and then stayed overnight at a motel in Tennessee. The next day, they continued their journey to carry out Amanda's violent plan. While driving, Amanda spotted two young girls at a rest stop on Blue Ridge Parkway, whom she saw as potential victims. She informed Sean that she intended to bring the girls to the car so he could shoot them. They needed money, and he consented. Amanda went outside to lead the girls to the car, but when she brought them inside, Sean refused to shoot them. Enraged, Amanda got back in the car and drove away, unable to calm her anger. She stopped in the driveway and confronted Sean, who was now her target. Amanda pulled a revolver from the glove compartment, got out of the car, and approached the passenger side where Sean sat with his eyes closed in fear. Anger overwhelmed her, but then she noticed a jogger nearby. In a sudden move, she aimed the gun at him and fired. Luckily, she missed, and the gunshot startled Sean open his eyes. Realizing the threat he faced, he saw the revolver aimed at him. Amanda warned him that before she killed him, she wanted him to know she only used him for the gun and the car. Then, she pulled the trigger, shooting Sean in the face. Amanda took a picture of Sean's bloody face to share on social media and then drove away, leaving him bleeding from a gunshot wound on the side of the road. Now she was on the run by herself. The police were searching for her, yet Amanda continued to post updates online. In her next post, she confessed to taking Sean's life during a traffic stop in a field. She shared a photo of a silver revolver resting in her lap on Instagram, captioning it with what felt like a suicide note, "Okay, it's about that time. I'm going to find my husband in hell and finally find peace. I love you, Mom, and my beautiful children. I know you will provide them the life I could never give. I will finally be free." The police were closely monitoring Amanda's account in hopes of locating her, and they succeeded. Surveillance cameras from gas stations along the route taken by the white SUV in which she fled helped the police track her down. Additionally, cell tower signals pinpointed Amanda's location on a North Carolina state highway. Patrol officers spotted a white SUV traveling east on I-40 near Asheville. When they attempted to pull her over, Amanda resisted arrest. Law enforcement was on high alert, aware that she was armed and considered very dangerous. After a 2-mile stretch filled with strategically placed spikes, the chaos finally came to an end. Amanda was taken into custody around 8 the next morning. Police officers pulled her out of the car and handcuffed her. Meanwhile, paramedics discovered Sean, injured, on the side of the road. In the interrogation room, Amanda acted indifferently, sipping a soft drink and playing with her hair until the captain and another detective entered. When questioned, she waived her right to remain silent and confessed to everything. She seemed surprisingly comfortable in the presence of the investigators. Amanda was informed that Sean was not dead. The bullet had passed through his jaw, causing him to faint from the pain but leaving him with no lasting injuries. In a startling statement, Amanda expressed her desire to go to the death chamber. In a surprising twist, Amanda changed her plea to not guilty in court. During the trial, she described her crime in detail, claiming she was justified in killing Charles, who had taken Rex away from her. Initially, she was furious with Rex, but her anger soon turned toward his father. Amanda confessed that she wanted Charles to feel the same pain she had endured. She claimed she killed Charles because she held him responsible for her husband Rex's death. According to Amanda, when Charles mentioned Rex again, she looked at him and began stabbing him. She acknowledged that she felt a strange happiness during those moments of violence. Ultimately, Amanda unleashed all her pent-up hatred and anger. By not pleading guilty, she sought attention and an opportunity to discuss her case. The investigator found Amanda's explanation appalling, especially since she likened her feelings about the crime to a happy memory. On November 12, 2015, Amanda Taylor was convicted of first-degree murder for the brutal killing of Charles Taylor. She was sentenced to life in prison, with the judge describing her as the embodiment of evil. As part of a plea bargain, Sean Ball acknowledged that he did not deserve sympathy and expressed deep remorse for his actions. Yet, he carries a constant guilt, pondering what led to his situation. Sean Ball accepted a plea deal for second-degree murder, receiving a 60-year sentence with 19 years suspended, requiring him to serve 41 years. He expressed deep remorse for his role in the crime. Amanda recently appealed her conviction but was unsuccessful. She mentioned that she plans to take her appeal to the Supreme Court if needed. While Amanda is not a repeat offender, she gained a reputation as a killer selfie taker. During this time, she surprisingly gave a phone interview to a local reporter, where she compared the experience of being stabbed to riding a roller coaster. Amanda Taylor committed a serious crime, and many people who knew her described her as a dark and troubling individual who had been obsessed with death, crime, and serial offenders since she was young. Her social media accounts were filled with disturbing images of death scenes. Anthony J. Dutcher was born on May 22, 1985, in Colorado Springs, USA. He was a dynamic individual with a wide range of interests. He managed to find time for many activities, including studying various musical instruments, languages, and martial arts. He also had a love for nature and enjoyed hiking. Anthony was capable of venturing into the forest alone for a few nights and surviving without assistance. He aspired to combine his passion for languages with his interest in martial arts, dreaming of a future as a translator, serving in the military, or pursuing a related career. Those who knew him described him as friendly, sociable, family-oriented, and ambitious. Anthony always made time for his loved ones, including his grandparents, Carl and Joanna, who lived in the small, close-knit community of Guffey, Colorado, which had a population of about 100 people. In Guffey, everyone knew each other, and the atmosphere was always peaceful and quiet. It was located an hour-and-a-half drive from Colorado Springs. Anthony loved visiting his grandparents because they lived in a peaceful, natural setting where he could explore the outdoors. Their tiny town had only a few dozen houses spread across the Great Plains. His grandfather, Carl Dutcher, was born in 1940. He served in the Army for 20 years before becoming a machinist, and for the last 13 years of his career, he worked in government positions, achieving significant success. His wife, Joanna, was born in 1942, had a diverse career as a cosmetologist, nurse, and store salesperson. Carl and Joanna had known each other since childhood, grew up together from the age of 7, fell in love, and married in 1964. Since then, they have been inseparable. They had 3 sons. After retiring, they moved to Guffey to enjoy their later years peacefully. There, they established a farm, started agricultural activities, and raised animals. Joanna was very sociable and active, while Carl preferred to stay at home and garden. He enjoyed working on their land. When Anthony visited, they purchased a small plot below the farm where Anthony built a hut. This hut was on a hill, offering a beautiful view of the surrounding area, including the family farm. Anthony and his grandfather constructed the hut several years ago. By the time Anthony turned 15, he began visiting more often, much to his grandparents' delight. They shared many interests, which helped them develop a close bond. On New Year's Eve, December 31, 2000, Anthony was 15 years old. He was going to celebrate the holiday with his grandparents. Since his parents were going out, his grandparents happily agreed to take care of him. The Dutchers dropped Anthony off at his grandparents' house on the morning of December 31st, where preparations for the evening's festivities were already underway. Later, Anthony's friend Isaac Grimes, who was also 15, planned to join them. The boys had been best friends for a long time and were set to go on a holiday camping trip to Anthony's cabin. Shortly before midnight, Anthony's mother called him. They exchanged greetings, both feeling anxious that the phone lines might be busy when midnight struck. They chatted for a while and agreed to reach out to each other on the morning of January 1st, after everyone had woken up. Anthony promised to call as soon as he got up, as he usually wakes up early. However, when his mother woke up in the morning, she did not receive the promised call or even a message, which she found odd. Anthony usually sent a congratulatory message that would arrive at night in case the lines were overloaded, but that didn't arrive either. At first, she didn't worry, thinking it was a night of celebration and rest. She also knew that the boys had planned to go to a remote hut where the connection might be weak. However, when neither the grandparents called nor responded, her concern began to grow. She decided to reach out to her relatives to understand what was happening, but none of them picked up her calls. Anthony's mother, Jennifer, tried multiple times to contact at least one family member, but no one answered until January 3, 2001. At that point, she could no longer dismiss her worries with excuses about camping or the holiday, so she called the police to request a welfare check on her relatives. Law enforcement responded quickly. When they arrived, they discovered a chaotic scene. An exterior examination showed signs of forced entry. Someone had broken into the house through the back door. Inside, everything was in disarray, and many items were damaged. When the patrol arrived at the kitchen, they discovered Carl Dutcher unresponsive on the floor, surrounded by a pool of blood. He had been shot twice in the chest. Concerned that the shooter might still be nearby, the officers drew their service weapons. There was no gun found beside the body, indicating that a crime had likely taken place. As they entered the hallway, they discovered a woman's body on the floor next to a broken toilet in the bathroom. It was Joanna. She was lifeless, lying in a large pool of blood. She had been shot 6 times, making it clear that her death was a murder, not an accident. The family was particularly concerned because Anthony was missing from the house. The police cordoned off the farm and initiated an investigation, focusing on locating Anthony first, as he might need help. Jennifer confirmed that he should have been with his grandparents at that time and couldn't have left for home alone without informing anyone. Anthony was declared missing, and a search was launched. The Dutcher family was devastated by the events and chose to travel to Guffey to help search for Anthony. Jennifer informed the police that her son planned to spend the night at a cabin in the forest, but she couldn't explain its exact location over the phone. The forensic still experts continued to investigate the site of the attack. It appeared to be a sudden and unprovoked assault. Carl seemed to have walked into the kitchen and was shot without any warning. He didn't have time to defend himself and showed no signs of struggle. Joanna, on the other hand, might have had slightly more time to react. The assailants attacked her, forcefully hitting her head against the edge of the toilet before shooting her. She likely tried to protect herself, as one of her hands was shot through. The bullet struck her head after entering through her palm, leading to her immediate death. She was presumably the second victim of the attackers and may have attempted to escape to the bathroom for safety, but it was futile. Members of the Dutcher family who arrived in Guffey, they reported that Carl had a strong interest in firearms. He owned a variety of guns, including different models of pistols and rifles, which he restored and sold as a hobby. At the time of the crime, there were several dozen firearms in his house. It was crucial to determine what might have been stolen. The son of Carl, Charles, assisted in this investigation, he sharing his father's passion for guns and having a rough idea of what was in their collection. This was an important lead, as the firearms were not stored openly but rather in a locked gun cabinet. For someone to find, open, and steal a gun, they would need to act with intention, suggesting that the criminal was familiar with both the victims and the location of the gun cabinet. Detectives started to entertain the theory that Anthony, the missing grandson, might be the killer. They were unsure about his fate. It was theorized that he could have taken a weapon and harmed his family before fleeing. However, Anthony's parents firmly rejected this idea. They emphasized that he loved his grandparents deeply and had great relationships with all his relatives. Furthermore, he did not have any mental health issues and had never run away. Overall, there were no known problems with him. Anthony's parents guided the police to the campsite in the woods where Anthony intended to spend the holiday with his best friend Isaac Grimes, in a cabin. Jennifer was hopeful of finding her son alive, believing he might be hiding there to escape any danger. The campsite was located about 500 meters from their home, situated on a hill obscured by thick vegetation. Several armed police officers, along with her, made their way to the site. When the police entered the scene, they quickly spotted a sleeping bag with someone inside and another empty bag nearby. There were also board games scattered around, suggesting they had started playing. Unfortunately, Jennifer's hopes were shattered. Anthony was present, but tragically, he had been murdered. His throat was deeply slit, nearly decapitating him. The attack was brutal, leaving him without a chance to defend himself. It appeared he was caught off guard and killed in cold blood, and the single, powerful blow indicated that the killer was experienced. Detectives found this particularly troubling. The precision and force suggested it was not the killer's first murder. Despite their efforts, the police could not locate the weapon used in the stabbing. The parents were thoroughly interviewed, sharing everything they knew about Anthony's belongings. It seemed the attacker had taken some valuables, which could assist in the investigation. Notably missing was a watch given to Anthony by his grandparents for the holiday. It was a significant, adorned with a blue flame design. On that day, another 15-year-old boy, named Isaac Grimes, had been at the campsite. This accounted for an extra sleeping bag and game set up in Anthony's cabin. It was clear that at least 2 people were present, but the other sleeping bag was empty. The police were now looking for another potential victim. They first decided to visit Isaac's home since he lived nearby. To their surprise, they found him there. 15-year-old Isaac Grimes opened the door calmly. He was alive and seemed unharmed. Isaac explained to investigators that he had initially planned to go to his relatives with Anthony on New Year's Eve to set up a tent camp. However, at the last minute, he decided to cancel his plans with Anthony because other friends invited him to a party in Colorado Springs. The party was organized by high school students, and Isaac chose to attend. He stated that he never reached the Dutcher's house, had not seen his best friend, and was unaware of what happened to him. Isaac was deeply saddened by the news of Anthony and his grandparents' deaths, but there was something troubling about how he was acting. Unfortunately, Anthony's mother wasn't certain if Isaac had visited Anthony that evening. They hadn't talked about it during her conversation with her son, but she did know that Isaac had been to the cabin with Anthony earlier. Anthony had taken him to his secret spot, which was meant to be kept private from everyone else. The detectives decided to confirm Isaac's statement by finding out who he attended the party with that night. Reluctantly, he provided the names of 2 classmates, Jonathan Matheny, who is 17, and Glenn Urban, who is 18. The police reached out to both boys, and while they were willing to talk, their accounts were surprisingly similar. It seemed as if they had rehearsed their stories, using the same phrases and wording, which is unusual during interrogations. However, this similarity alone was not sufficient to charge them. The police needed evidence linking them to the crime scene. Regardless, Jonathan and Glenn, along with Anthony's best friend, Isaac, remained under suspicion. It was unclear whose sleeping bag was found next to Anthony's body in his cabin. Following this, the autopsy report was released, showing that all the victims, Carl, Joanna, and Anthony, had died on New Year's Eve. This strongly suggested that the killer had targeted the family specifically, as he knew where to find each of them. The attacker must have been familiar with the Dutcher family, since very few people knew about Anthony's secret cabin or Grandpa's gun cabinet. This theory was further supported by the fact that Carl's house had weapons. He had a habit of always carrying a gun with him before opening the door and typically kept it near the entrance. For an American living in a remote area, having a gun can be crucial for self-defense. This practice was so common that the grandfather would even greet his children and grandchildren while holding a gun. However, Carl unprepared when the attack occurred. The assailant or assailants were careful and left no evidence in the house. It was believed that Anthony was the first victim and was likely killed by a single attacker. The house assault might have been carried out by another individual, as suggested by the different behavior, style, and weapon used in the attack. Nonetheless, these theories could not be confirmed. The investigation lasted for 2 months. No useful evidence had been discovered. Then, on March 6, 2001, Isaac came to the police station, terrified for his life. He shared a bizarre story about being chased by a man with a shotgun who had killed his best friend's family. Initially, this seemed like paranoia, possibly the result of the boy being deeply affected by the recent murders of 3 people. However, given this new information, the detectives began to suspect something more and decided to re-examine the events from New Year's Eve. One of the investigators recalled the watch mentioned by Anthonia's parents. When they met with Isaac, they asked him about it. He claimed he had seen the watch on his friend, which was the biggest contradiction in the investigation. The watch had only been given on New Year's Eve, so Isaac couldn't have seen it unless their meeting occurred just before midnight. This conflicted with Isaac's earlier statements. It became evident that Isaac had been in the house and knew more than he let on. It appeared that the investigation was making progress. On March 8, 2001, Isaac Grimes and his parents were called in for an official questioning. He maintained that he had not been at his friend's house on the night of the incident. The police then shifted their focus to the watch, effectively exposing Isaac's lies in front of his family. This investigation led to the discovery of an army jacket with blood stains in the victim's house. Eventually, Isaac succumbed to the pressure of his conflicting statements and confessed. Isaac shared the truth about what occurred on New Year's Eve. He explained that just before midnight, his classmate Jonathan Matheny brought he over to Anthony's house. The boys greeted each other, exchanged holiday wishes, and then went to a campsite together. There, they spent time as friends, played games, and shared stories. Anthony was unaware that his best friend had hidden a knife. As they were about to go to bed, Isaac distracted Anthony by pointing out a light in the window. When Anthony looked away, Isaac approached him from behind, drew a knife, and stabbed Anthony in the throat with great force, resulting in a fatal injury. The medical examiner was later shocked to discover that a 15-year-old boy could inflict such a deep wound with a single strike. Isaac acknowledged that he had applied all his strength in the attack. Jonathan Matheny arrived at the Dutcher farm around 4 a.m. with a rifle. He waited at a distance for Isaac to return, and then they both entered the house to confront the elderly couple, breaking down the back door. The noise disturbed the homeowners. Joanna and Carl got up, and Carl went to the kitchen to see what had happened, likely intending to scare off the intruders, unaware they were there to kill them. Jonathan shot Carl first while Isaac just watched. Carl fell to the ground after a couple of shots. Terrified, Joanna fled to the bathroom and locked the door, hoping to hide, but Jonathan had no intention of leaving any witnesses. He forced open the bathroom door, struck Joanna's head against the toilet, and then shot her. It's important to note that both perpetrators were still in school. Jonathan was 17 and Isaac was only 15. Isaac later stated that he simply followed his older friend and watched as he committed these crimes. The criminals knew about the weapons Carl owned and took several with them. They loaded the weapons into a car trunk and drove to the house of Glenn Urban, 18-year-old. They gave him a knife and a rifle that had been used to attack 2 people, instructing him to get rid of the weapons, making him an accomplice. The police could not determine the motive behind the crime, and Isaac refused to speak. The source of the rifle was also unknown. 17-year-old Jonathan Matheny was arrested right after he confessed, but he claimed he was not involved in the triple murder. Then Glenn Urban was taken into custody. He initially denied any involvement but eventually confessed. Glenn revealed that he had been instructed to dispose of the weapons and provided important information. He alleged that another teenager, Simon Sue, who was 18 at the time, played a key role in the crime. Glenn stated that Simon was the one who planned the massacre, chose the targets, directed the operation, and devised a way to cover up the evidence. At Simon's urging, Glenn was instructed to destroy the weapon. He took it apart and disposed of the pieces in various locations. During the investigation, the detectives learned about Simon for the first time and decided to question the other 2 people involved in the crime. However, those still individuals refused to speak. It was revealed that Simon had a lonely and unloved childhood, with very little social interaction during his school years. He met Isaac, Glenn, and Jonathan while in high school. Isaac and Simon became friends through their shared interests in chess and video games. All three of them were socially awkward and had few friends, wishing desperately to be more popular. Over time, Simon gained influence over the group, promising them a more exciting life. He claimed to be part of a secret organization and said he had connections with a rebel army in Guyana. This behavior was similar to recruitment methods used to attract socially isolated schoolchildren who want to belong to something bigger. It soon became clear that Simon had deceived them all. When they became part of this organization, they underwent intense training that included using firearms and throat-cutting techniques. Simon assigned progressively tougher and more brutal tasks. It got to the point where he compelled them to eat and drink to the point of exhaustion, referring to this torment as a test of their willpower. In the end, he manipulated the teenagers so thoroughly that they couldn't picture their lives outside of this organization in completing Simon's demands. Simon ran the club like a military unit, assigning each member a military rank to inspire them to serve him better. He forced the boys to give him a portion of their money and punished them harshly for disobedience. One of the ongoing activities was watching disturbing videos of real animal and human killings. When Isaac voiced his concerns and showed signs that he felt something was wrong, Simon labeled him a traitor. He threatened Isaac with violence and demanded that he prove his loyalty to the group, all while being pressured by two older boys. Isaac was given the task of killing his best friend, Anthony, to prove his loyalty to the team. Jonathan was tasked with getting rid of Anthony's grandparents. Both were supposed to retrieve several weapons from Carl's house. Since they lived nearby, they were aware of his interest in weapon restoration and knew about his gun cabinet. It was not difficult to find out the location thanks to Anthony. But why was the Dutcher family chosen as the victims? The motive for the triple murder of these individuals remained a mystery. According to sources, Carl may have made some unpleasant remark about Simon, which could have provoked hatred. However, there was no confirmation of this. All the students claimed that Simon set them against Carl because the real motive might have been the presence of firearms, which Simon wanted to acquire. When the police raided Simon Sue's house with a warrant, they quickly found evidence that corroborated what the other teenagers had said. Specifically, they discovered several items stolen from Carl. It appeared that real preparations for another crime were underway. The manipulator was found to have several dozen firearms, all of which had been stolen during various assaults. However, prior to the tragedy at Carl Farm, these assaults had not been violent. There were at least 30 pistols and rifles in the house, which now needed to be examined. Despite being 18 years old, the leader of the gang had his own warehouse, containing even more weapons, spare parts in various stages of disassembly, and ammunition. There was a whole arsenal stored there, including an AK-47. According to the police, it could arm a small infantry unit. Simon was taken in for questioning. Despite being a quiet and unloved young man, he turned out to be very cunning and cynical. He refused to admit guilt, claiming that Glenn, Isaac, and Jonathan were the real criminals who wanted to make him the scapegoat. According to Simon, he was in Canada at the time of the attack and had nothing to do with what happened. Of course, the leader of the gang lied. He denied forcing his friends to engage in various extreme activities and described the club they allegedly belonged to as merely an entertainment community. He immediately began to proclaim that all three accomplices had mental and behavioral issues, labeling all of them as aggressive. It was clear he had prepared extensively in case he was caught. Ultimately, it was decided to try all the criminals as adults for the triple murder. Isaac Grimes pleaded guilty to the murder of Anthony Dutcher, his best friend. He was sentenced to 60 years in prison. Jonathan Matheny and Simon Sue were charged with organizing criminal activity, planning murder, and the legal possession of weapons. Jonathan Matheny was also charged with double murder. In the end, Jonathan sentenced to 68 years in prison, while the ringleader, Simon Sue, was sentenced to 53 years in prison. For aiding the criminal group and disposing of the instrument of the crime, Glenn Urban was sentenced to only 2 years in prison. It was proven that he did not plan or commit the crime, though he was fully aware of his friend's plans and did not help prevent the atrocities. Isaac's mother still cannot believe that her son committed such a horrific crime. She struggles to understand how her sweet, kind son, Isaac, turned into a real monster under the influence of a dangerous manipulator. Isaac himself explains his participation in the murder by stating that he was intimidated and threatened. He was warned that if he did not obey and fulfill his role, his family would be killed, which left him feeling forced to stab his best friend. After beginning his sentence, Isaac wrote a letter in which he expressed remorse for the crime he had committed. Some of Anthony's relatives do not believe Isaac's story about intimidation and think that he could have gone to the police, which could have prevented anyone from being harmed, neither his family nor the Dutcher family. Dutcher family feel that the sentences given are too light. They believe Simon and Jonathan should receive the death penalty for the brutal killings of innocent people. Anthony's mother expressed forgiveness towards Isaac and even testified on his behalf during the trial to help lessen his sentence. She thinks that Isaac was manipulated by Simon. After her son's death, she was so heartbroken that she attempted to end her life twice. Despite this, she continues to write letters to Isaac and feels compassion for him. The tragic end of the Dutcher family story is a heartbreaking reminder of human complexity and the consequences of psychological manipulation. The case not only claimed the lives of Anthony, Carl, and Joanna, but it also left deep wounds in the hearts of the family and the community. Although justice was served through the convictions of Isaac, Jonathan, Simon, and Glenn, the Dutcher family's loss remains irreparable. Jennifer's act of forgiveness toward Isaac reflects love and compassion while also raising questions about personal responsibility and the effects of manipulation. Now more than ever, this story draws attention to the need to protect young people from negative influences and reminds us of the value of family and community engagement in preventing similar tragedies. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Jody Myers. One day, 20-year-old Jody Myers and her fiancé, 31-year-old Neil Archer, were attending a birthday party for Jody's stepfather. Although the celebration was lively, Neil was not enjoying themselves. Neil was reluctant to participate and chose to sit in Jody's car while she mingled with family and friends by the fireplace. Jody frequently had to return to the car to convince Neil to join the party. Some guests even brought him snacks in hopes of cheering him up. Around 8:30 p.m. Neil and Jody left the party, and their argument occurred at home. Jody's mother, Lucy, received a message from her daughter stating that she couldn't come home that night because she had broken up with Neil, and she changed her phone number. Jody mentioned she would let her parents know where she was later, that she had moved to a different area, and that she had quit her job. Once things calmed down, she promised to explain everything in detail. Jody also assured her mother that she was safe, that her friends were with her, and she also expressed her love for her family. The message was poorly written and lacked punctuation, which concerned Lucy. She noticed several spelling errors, which were also unusual for Jody, who generally had no issues with spelling and grammar. Normally, if she made a mistake, she would quickly correct it, but in this case, she did not. One possible explanation for Jody's behavior is that she was feeling rushed or stressed after breaking up with her fiancé the night before. However, it was puzzling why Jody would take the time to write a message when she was likely overwhelmed. This causes Jody's mother and sisters to suspect that she was not the one who sent the message. Furthermore, Jody would never abandon her 2-year-old son, Elijah, who she had with Neil. Her family was certain of this. Elijah was the center of Jody's life, and she loved him dearly. Friends and family believed that if Jody had intended to leave, she would have taken him with her. This concern prompted the family to report Jody's disappearance to the police. The family members were reluctant to accept that something terrible might have happened, but they were also worried about losing precious time. Doubts began to arise in their minds, and they feared that the police might not take their report seriously, as cases of missing young women who had argued with their fiancés were often overlooked. However, the police treated Jody's family's report with great seriousness. They were particularly concerned that Jody had left her child behind, which was an unusual situation they couldn't ignore. Detectives quickly launched a search, and public worry grew when it became known that someone had used Jody's bank card to withdraw $250 from an ATM in the city center. This raised the possibility that either Jody was nearby and intended to return, or an unknown person was trying to cover up the situation. Jody Myers was officially reported missing, prompting an investigation. Jody's story quickly gained attention across, especially among investigative teams. Authorities interviewed everyone close to Jody, including her fiancé Neil, but none could provide useful information about her whereabouts. Neil, being the last person to see her, shared details with the police. He revealed that he and Jody had argued on their way home from a party. During the drive, Jody angrily threw her ring out of the window, and the police later searched for it. Neil also stated that he last saw Jody when she got into a red Nissan X-Trail with an unknown man and woman. The police did not disclose that Neil was their main focus. They described him as a valuable witness, but at that point, he was their only person of interest. Extensive searches were conducted in the areas surrounding where Jody was last seen, including local bushland and the Murray River, but no trace of her was found. The ring Jody allegedly threw out of the car also remained missing, despite Neil indicating where it might be. As the investigation progressed, relatives, friends, and acquaintances frequently appeared in the media to discuss the case and share their thoughts. Neil's mother, 57-year-old Margaret Archer, spoke to reporters about her son's partner, Jody. Margaret expressed hope for Jody's return, as she is needed by her son. Meanwhile, Neil addressed the media, responding to their presence outside his house while playing with his son. He took the increased attention calmly, stating only that it was a bit stressful for him, but he was happy to assist the authorities in the investigation. For the purpose of the investigation, the police requested video footage from ATM surveillance cameras and were surprised by what they found. The money had not been withdrawn by Jody or Neil, as they had previously thought. Instead, it was a woman in a hooded sweatshirt, clearly trying to conceal her identity. Detectives quickly identified this woman as Margaret. While her cash withdrawal did not implicate her in murder, she was arrested for theft. It was unclear how Margaret had obtained Jody's bank card and used it after Jody went missing. Margaret might have stolen the card or borrowed it from Jody. Regardless, Margaret strongly denied any involvement in Jody's disappearance, both to the police and in public. After being questioned, she was released on bail. But this unusual situation led investigators to closely examine her actions during the time Jody was missing. Detectives discovered 2 receipts from different hardware stores. Margaret had purchased 10 bags of cement from one store and another 10 bags from a second store, along with a wheelbarrow. These purchases were notable for their large quantity. Investigators needed to verify that these transactions were made by Margaret. They visited the store where Neil's mother had gone 3 days after Jody's disappearance. After reviewing the surveillance footage, they confirmed that Margaret had indeed bought a large amount of cement. However, they questioned why she needed so much. While buying construction materials is not illegal, detectives still needed to understand the context of those purchases. The purchase had been made with the exact amount that Margaret withdrew from the ATM, which left the police confused, until they spoke with Margaret's husband, Lawrence. He explained that on the day Jody went missing, he was in Tasmania. When he returned home, his son Neil told him he had a Father's Day gift. Since Neil rarely showed generosity, he was intrigued. Neil led him to the yard, where a freshly poured concrete slab lay in the shed, which Neil had just finished. Lawrence was surprised, as he thought of Neil as lazy and selfish, but he could see that his son had done a lot of hard work. He thanked Neil for the gift and began sharing stories about his trip to Tasmania. As the detectives listened, they began to connect the dots, realizing that Neil was no longer just a witness. He was now the main suspect in Jody's disappearance. At the same time, Neil's brother, Aaron Archer, felt guilty because he knew something, but was afraid to speak up for fear of implicating his family. Aaron was hesitant to carry out certain tasks requested by relatives. When he learned something troubling, He urged Neil to go to the police, but Neil refused. With no other option, he went to the station and decided to share everything he knew. On September 24, 2015, at midnight, Aaron met with police officers at a predetermined location. Following his brother's visit to the police station, Neil was taken into custody and charged with the murder of his fiancée, Jody Myers. The next day, investigators searched the home of Margaret in Murray Bridge, a town about an hour and a half from Adelaide. During this search, forensic teams discovered a woman's body buried in a shallow grave beneath a concrete slab in the shed. This slab had been a Father's Day gift for Lawrence. Experts later confirmed that the body was Jody Myers, who had been missing for a month. Investigators indicated that the evidence suggested a violent murder had taken place. Afterward, Lucy's son-in-law, Michael Bates, publicly expressed the family's hopes for Jody's safe return until they received the tragic news. Her death created a profound loss for them, but they cherished the loving memories of her as a mother, daughter, and sister, emphasizing that she was not to be blamed for anything. From that point on, the family was left with only memories, which they considered their most precious treasures. A few months later, Margaret was arrested for her alleged involvement in Jody's murder. Despite the charges, Margaret was working hard to prove her innocence. It is believed that Neil's father, Lawrence, was unaware of the events surrounding the case. Then, investigators have built a detailed narrative into the Jody Myers case. After returning home from a party, Jody and Neil had a severe argument. Neil felt that he had not impressed Jody's parents and believed they wanted him and Jody to break up. In a moment of rage, he lost control and strangled Jody with the cord of his hoodie until she stopped breathing. Later, reports surfaced that while in jail, Neil told other inmates that his mother had been present during the argument and had restrained Jody, although this claim could not be substantiated. The following day, Neil asked his mother to help him hide the crime, and Margaret, without hesitation, agreed to dispose of the evidence related to the murder of Jody, who had given her a grandchild. She withdrew cash from the ATM to buy cement and added $10 to Jody's phone to send a message to Jody's family. It became clear that Neil pressured his mother to handle all the illicit activities for him. Margaret had previously been a victim of domestic violence herself, which makes it even more perplexing that she would agree to cover up such a tragic crime. Many people find this behavior abnormal, regardless of a mother's love for her child. It is difficult to believe she would justify helping him in such a horrific situation. However, some parents claim they would do anything for their children, and Margaret likely belonged to this group, which is truly disturbing. Even more alarming is the fact that Jody's 2-year-old son, Elijah, partially witnessed the incident. He was sitting in the car while Margaret visited hardware stores and made purchases. It was also revealed that Elijah was in Margaret's house when Neil transported and buried his mother's body in a shed. As the case progressed, new information shocked the public. The police recorded phone calls between Margaret and Neil discussing how to hide the crime. Both felt guilty and unable to find a solution to their problem. During their conversations, they also mentioned Neil's brother, Aaron. Margaret attempted to involve her second son, and later his half-sister, in the cover-up. She pressured them to burn clothes and destroy evidence, such as cement bags. However, Aaron cleverly refused to comply and eventually reported the situation to the police. In 2016, Neil Archer pleaded guilty to the murder of Jody Myers. In 2017, he was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 22 years. This outcome is relatively favorable by Australian standards, and it is reassuring that the murderer accepted his guilt. In South Australia, a guilty plea can lead to a sentence reduction of about 30%, but the judge determined that Neil did not merit this reduction. Jody's friends and family were pleased with the verdict. Meanwhile, Margaret Archer hesitated until the last moment to admit her wrongdoing. She changed her story and confessed. Her lawyer claimed that Margaret had always lived a good life and cared deeply for her large family. However, considering that she waited until the very end, unwilling to confess to the crime. One can easily conclude that Margaret felt no remorse for her actions. In 2018, she was sentenced to 6.5 years in prison for aiding a criminal. Then, she was released in June 2022. Meanwhile, little Elijah is being cared for by his grandmother, Lucy. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Angelica Graswald. On the evening of April 19, 2015, Angelica Graswald and Vincent Villafor went kayaking. Both enjoyed an active lifestyle and outdoor activities, with kayaking being one of their favorites. Their relationship, which had grown over the years, was strengthened by their shared passion. That day, the couple decided to kayak across the Hudson River to Bannerman Island. They enjoyed their time there, but around 7 p.m., they decided it was time to head home. However, the wind picked up on the Hudson River, creating waves about a meter high, which posed a significant challenge to their kayak. Despite the risk, Angelica and Vincent decided to turn back because they did not have the necessary equipment to stay overnight on the island. Initially, they managed to navigate the strong waves, but as they reached the other shore, Vincent's kayak began to fill with water. The situation was worsened by the fact that Vincent was not wearing a life jacket and the water was extremely cold. In April, the river had not yet warmed up, and darkness was approaching, which posed a significant risk. Vincent shouted to Angelica to call 911 as he was already in the water and struggling to stay afloat. At approximately 7:30 p.m., on April 19, 2015, Angelica called 911, sounding desperate. She explained that she was on the Hudson River with her fiancé, who had fallen into the water. She said that he did not have any life-saving equipment and that the strong winds and waves made it impossible for her to swim to him. Angelica was extremely concerned, emphasizing that Vincent was being swept away by the current and was in danger of drowning, and she urgently called for help. When rescuers arrived, Vincent was no longer visible from the shore. The rescuers were shocked that the young couple had chosen to kayak in such harsh conditions. Angelica was cold, and they helped her warm up while they began searching for Vincent. The situation appeared to be a tragic accident. Angelica sat on the shore and cried, unable to find Vincent. She was devastated by his disappearance. The couple had planned their wedding, and now their dreams of a future together seemed shattered. The police spoke to her to gather details of what had happened, but she was in shock, making it difficult for her to calm down. Vincent's relatives and friends claimed that he was extremely skilled and knew how to handle waves of all sizes. The circumstances surrounding Vincent's disappearance were so strange that several people reported the couple's relationship to the police. Their relationship had recently deteriorated, and there had been numerous reports about it. As a result, the police felt compelled to conduct a thorough investigation. However, in order to reach any firm conclusions, they needed to locate Vincent's body and his kayak. The police then interviewed Angelica again. Angelica agreed to come to the station for questioning, unaware of how much this conversation would affect her life. At 35, Angelica was an attractive woman. Originally from Latvia, she had always sought work opportunities abroad for better prospects. Although she had been married and divorced twice, she had never given up on her dream of a new life. Eventually, luck was on her side when she secured a job as a nanny in the United States. This job suited her perfectly, as Angelica was kind, caring, and calm, which allowed her to bond well with children. During this time, Angelica met Vincent, who was also twice divorced and 46 years old. Vincent had built a successful career in the construction industry and was quite wealthy. Some acquaintances believed that she was using Vincent to secure her position in the United States by marrying an American. Vincent was generous and loved to throw parties. A few weeks after they met, Angelica moved into Vincent's home in Kips Bay, New York. Their relationship quickly progressed, and they began to discuss marriage and children. While Angelica looked for a new job, Vincent worked to provide for her needs. Their life was stable until a tragic accident occurred. Vincent and Angelica attended a party with friends the day before the tragic kayaking accident. During the party, Angelica left early, saying she was not feeling well. She spent most of the evening alone and had little interaction with others. Vincent's friends observed some tension between the couple, noting a minor argument, but nothing serious. The next morning, they met again. That evening, Vincent shared his kayaking plans with his friends, but they were unable to change his mind due to his stubbornness. Despite the cold weather, the next day, Vincent suggested they make up and go on vacation to the Hudson, and Angelica agreed immediately. The couple had planned to take photos at Bannerman Castle, which was located in the middle of the river. Angelica had brought some nice outfits for the photo shoot. By 4 p.m., they had reached the riverbank and were ready to leave for the island. Angelica noticed that the wind had picked up considerably. It was cold, and rain was in the forecast, but that didn't stop them. The couple enjoyed extreme sports and felt confident because they had paddled in similar conditions before. Angelica's timeline was confirmed by the photos they took. She mentioned that they had had a few beers beforehand. They both drank enough to enjoy themselves while ensuring they were sober when they got home to drive. During questioning, Angelica told the police that she knew there was a problem with the drain plug on Vincent's kayak. He needed to replace it, but she did not check it before they left. The journey to the castle was difficult, and Vincent often passed her. The pair made good use of the large waves. However, on the way back, Angelica noticed that Vincent had suddenly fallen far behind. The waves grew higher, and suddenly he started calling out to her, asking her to contact rescuers. When Angelica turned around, she saw that Vincent's kayak was taking on water and starting to sink. Vincent struggled to stay afloat, while the current carried Angelica toward the shore, making it impossible for her to return to help him. She had no choice but to go to shore to call for rescue. By then, Vincent had disappeared from sight. They searched for Vincent all night, and the next day, a search operation continued. Divers scoured the river for his body, while boats equipped with sonar scanned the water. Search teams worked throughout the day despite the fog and high waves. Rescue helicopters were also deployed. Vincent's family was shocked and distraught by his disappearance. Among them, Angelica appeared the calmest. She continued to post various photos and videos on social media, which seemed out of place given the circumstances. When asked, she said she still hoped Vincent would be rescued and remained positive. However, his relatives felt she was indifferent to the severity of the situation. Meanwhile, searchers knew that almost no one, not even a skilled athlete, could survive in such harsh conditions. 10 days after Vincent went missing, Angelica was called in for further questioning. She casually mentioned that she might have removed the drain plug from Vincent's kayak when they returned. This led the police to suspect that his disappearance might not have been accidental, and that she might have been involved in his drowning. She also mentioned that Vincent's oar was broken, which she had tried to fix. According to her statement, she had removed the fixing ring from the oar blade. The police believed that the unscrewed drain plug and the broken oar suggested that Angelica might have wanted to kill him. However, they could not understand her motive, as killing someone before marrying him seemed absurd, especially since she did not yet have citizenship or inheritance rights to his property. To gather more information about Angelica, the police decided to interview her acquaintances, which led them to her ex-boyfriend. He was shocked to hear that Angelica might be a murderer. However, the investigation had only just begun. He admitted that Angelica had a darker side. He recalled several times they had drunk together, during which Angelica often caused conflict. He described her as manipulative, noting that she did not want him to go out without her. During questioning, Angelica admitted that there were indeed problems in her relationship. She believed that these problems were related to Vincent's need for intimacy. She expressed that they should break up, the police soon identified a possible motive for the murder. Angelica inherited about $500,000 from his life insurance policy, of which she was named the primary beneficiary. This money could have solved her financial difficulties and helped her start over, especially since she was unemployed. Despite the overwhelming evidence against her, Angelica maintained her innocence. She was arrested and released on bail before her trial, facing a charge of second-degree murder. Her attorney argued that the confession obtained during an 11-hour interrogation should not be considered valid. The defense attorney emphasized the autopsy and its results to determine if there were signs of violence, which would be necessary to establish the murder charge. He claimed that the incident was an unfortunate accident. The attorney believed that the kayak likely capsized due to the waves, or that the drain plug came loose when the kayak was hit by the waves. There was also discussion of the strong winds, cold water, and lack of a life jacket. However, Angelica was wearing a life jacket and took precautions for her safety, unlike Vincent. Vincent, on the other hand, had no regard for his own safety and was drunk, which may have influenced his actions. To counter the prosecutor's claims, the attorney conducted an investigation on the Hudson River. He had a man of similar build to Vincent use a similarly styled kayak to demonstrate how low the water level was in the small boat. The attorney argued that large waves could have quickly flooded the kayak, even without the drain plug being removed. Drunken Vincent may have made several mistakes despite his skill and training, suggesting that the incident should be considered an accident. There is some debate about whether the kayak could have absorbed enough water to sink quickly several miles from shore. The drain plug was particularly controversial. It was a small hole, about the size of a pinky finger, located on the top of Vincent's model kayak. This raises the question of whether a significant amount of water could have entered through the hole if it had been left open. To investigate this theory, additional tests were conducted using the same kayak model and a mannequin of the same weight and size as Vincent. Tests were performed to determine how much water could have entered through the open drain plug while the rest of the kayak was sealed. The results showed that the hole was too small. Each wave that struck the kayak only allowed a few drops of water to enter. Therefore, they were able to paddle several kilometers to safety. A small hole would certainly not have been enough to sink the entire kayak. The lawyer argued that Vincent's kayak could have capsized due to the strong waves, especially considering his level of intoxication. This explanation seemed more plausible than the theory that it had flooded because of the drain plug. During questioning, Angelica admitted that she had removed the drain plug from Vincent's kayak. This raised suspicions that she had done so to cause trouble for her fiancé, who was considering calling off the wedding. The potential life insurance payout could have seemed like a path to a better future for her. The defense believed that Angelica's comments led the police to charge her with murder. The police had dismissed the possibility of an accident, despite clear evidence of bad weather. To address this issue, the attorneys called in an expert with years of experience working with criminals. This expert scrutinized every detail of Angelica's 11-hour interrogation. The expert believes that the police repeatedly violated the rules of interrogation. They clearly pressured Angelica, causing her to give false statements. During her conversation with the police, Angelica mentioned that she adjusted and tried to tighten the drain plug. However, throughout the recording, there is no clear confession to the murder. The frightened and exhausted girl fell into a trap by misunderstanding some of the police's vague questions. The interrogation mainly involved the police trying to get Angelica to repeat what she had said on the island where Vincent drowned. The expert noted that she was clearly frightened, slightly intoxicated, and traumatized by witnessing her lover drown. In such a state, it would be unreasonable to interpret her statements as evidence of guilt. However, when she arrived at the station, the police put considerable pressure on her, focusing particularly on the words she had said near the Hudson River. An expert interrogator observed clear signs of manipulation during the interrogation. Through many leading questions, the police discovered that the underlying motive was anger over Vincent's unorthodox views on intimacy. Police explained Angelica's actions by mentioning her touching the boat's drain plug, which they believe led to Vincent's drowning. The expert suspected that Angelica's confession was coerced, although not through physical violence. The police employed many classic interrogation techniques to extract a confession. When Angelica finally mentioned that she had thought about getting out of the relationship, the police treated this as a confession to murder. However, contrary to the prosecutor's belief, she never used the word murder during the conversation at the station. After the police heard what they wanted, they ignored all of Angelica's other statements. In fact, she claimed that this was not the first time she had encountered problems with the kayak. The issues had started a few months before the Vincent's crash. In the winter, the button had been missing for a while, and during that time, they visited the reservoirs and floated without any problems. Unfortunately, the police noticed inconsistencies in Angelica's testimony. She initially said that there was a button, but then insisted that there was none. This inconsistency caused the police to intensify their questioning. The key moment in the interrogation that the expert examined was when Angelica began to break down. She cried and expressed a need to care for her cat at home. After a grueling 11 hours at the police station, she looked exhausted. The police seemed to see her emotional state as an opportunity to extract a confession to the murder. They increased the pressure and asked her leading questions. Ultimately, however, Angelica did not confess to the crime. The expert concluded that the erroneous answers given during questioning were misleading. Angelica's anxiety and intense desire to escape the unpleasant situation caused her to give some inaccurate answers. She did not know that these answers would be used to build a case against her for a murder she did not commit. On the morning of Saturday, May 23, 2015, Vincent's body was discovered a month after his disappearance in the Hudson River. A boatman found the body a few miles downstream from Bannerman Island, where the couple had been visiting that fateful day. An autopsy was performed, and the medical examiner determined that Vincent had drowned. He likely died from the cold water and strong currents, which made it difficult for him to stay afloat. There were no signs of violence, physical assault, or strangulation on his body. However, there was some alcohol in his blood, although not in excessive amounts. They also started looking for the kayak in that direction. After a while, they found it drifting a few hundred meters away. It turned out that Vincent's kayak had lost its drain plug. They found the paddle, and it was still usable. The defense argued that the lack of a drain plug and problems with the paddle could not have caused the drowning. They claimed that only when combined with other factors, such as water temperature, wind conditions, the absence of a life jacket, and the influence of alcohol, could Vincent's situation have led to the tragedy. The prosecutor's office then focused on inconsistencies in Angelica's testimony, believing that they pointed to her involvement in the murder. The attorney argued that the incident was an accident due to Vincent's own negligence. He had been intoxicated in rough waters and was not wearing a life jacket. Vincent was fully aware that the water was cold, and that if he fell in, his chances of survival would be virtually non-existent. Angelica maintained her innocence, but the situation soon changed. The prosecutor's office began to realize that proving she had attempted murder by pulling the drain plug from his kayak would be too difficult. This weak evidence made it challenging for them to convince a jury of her guilt. Meanwhile, Angelica's defense attorney worked extensively with experts, presenting strong factual arguments to support her case. Angelica was offered a plea deal to plead guilty to involuntary manslaughter. Under state law, second-degree murder is punishable by life in prison, while charges involving negligent conduct or accidents are punishable by 1 to 4 years in prison. Given the time she had already spent in custody, her attorney advised her to accept the deal. Angelica agreed, and her confession helped her avoid a jury trial. She was eventually sentenced to 4 years in prison, most of which she served while awaiting trial. On December 21, 2017, Angelica was paroled after serving 32 months. Vincent's family and friends were unhappy with the decision, still believing she had killed her fiancé. Despite their accusations, Angelica maintained her innocence, claiming that only she and God knew the truth. After her release, she sought peace, but faced the threat of deportation and challenges in finding employment. Angelica attempted to claim benefits from Vincent's insurance policy, but her earlier guilty plea made this impossible. She was then forced to return to her home country. There, she enrolled in college, found a job, and resumed her life, fully recovering from the trauma of her past. On February 17, 2023, in Hexham, England, friends and family gathered to honor 15-year-old Holly Newton at her funeral. Holly was a beloved teenager, known for her kindness. Hundreds of mourners participated in a procession to Hexham Abbey to pay their respects. Holly's mother, Maguad Trussler, shared heartfelt memories of her daughter, stating, "Some people are just too good for this world, and Holly was one of them." Holly's white coffin, decorated with purple flowers and messages of sympathy, was carried along the high street by 4 black horses dressed in purple jackets, her favorite color. One message read, "Sleep tight, beautiful Holly, in the sky until we meet again. Love you forever." She was remembered as a bright, caring young woman with a promising future. Her family and friends described her as compassionate, someone who made a positive impact on everyone around her. Holly enjoyed spending time with friends and engaging in social activities, easily connecting with others thanks to her friendly personality. Holly met Logan MacPhail while participating in Army Cadets, a youth organization focused on military training and activities for young people. This setting often unites individuals with shared interests in discipline and teamwork, which likely helped them bond initially. Their relationship started like a typical teenage romance as they enjoyed each other's company and shared interests. However, as their relationship developed, it became increasingly troubled due to Logan's controlling behavior. Logan's controlling behavior became evident in several ways. He insisted on knowing where Holly was at all times and interfered with her social media by changing her passwords, limiting her ability to connect with others. This is a common sign of someone trying to dominate their partner. Holly's friends and family observed that she was becoming increasingly isolated. Despite these warning signs, Holly initially stayed in a relationship with Logan, which is often the case for teenagers who may not fully recognize the signs of an unhealthy relationship. Maguad mentioned that Logan was Holly's first and only boyfriend, that their relationship had typical teenage ups and downs. Logan spent weekends with Holly's family, and her mother and stepfather were unaware that he was putting on a facade when he visited their home. However, the issues in Holly and Logan's relationship continued to escalate. Eventually, Holly chose to end the relationship due to Logan's obsessive behavior. He struggled to accept the breakup, became even more fixated on her. Maguad observed that her caring and mature daughter was more emotionally developed than Logan, yet when Holly tried to break up with him, he resorted to emotional manipulation, which frightened her. Maguad said she didn't realize the extent of the turmoil Holly was experiencing at that time. Logan had become fixated on Holly, believing that if he couldn't have her, no one else could. She also noted that she didn't recognize the warning signs of his controlling behavior until it was too late, and she was unaware of the emotional distress Holly was facing while trying to break up with Logan. Logan's reaction to the breakup was intense. He started following Holly around town, attempted to control her life. On the night of January 26th, he appeared unexpectedly outside her house and had to be taken home by the police. Holly and her parents were planning to meet with the police to discuss their concerns about Logan, but a tragic event occurred. After Logan showed up at their home uninvited and insisted on speaking to Holly, her mother, Maguad, reached out to Northumbria Police for help. They scheduled a meeting for 4 p.m. on January 27th, but Holly requested to delay it so she could go out with friends after school. The meeting was postponed to the evening, but just hours before it was set to happen, a terrible incident occurred involving Holly. In the investigation of Holly's case, detectives uncovered disturbing CCTV footage that showed the moments leading up to her death. The timeline of events from the day after Logan appeared uninvited at Holly's home was pieced together. Unable to accept their breakup, MacPhail left his school early the next day, carrying a kitchen knife in his backpack. He took a bus to Hexham, waited for Holly to go into town. Dressed entirely in black, with a face mask and baseball cap to hide his identity, MacPhail followed Holly and her friends as they visited a leisure center for about 45 minutes. During this time, he also sent several voice messages to people close to Holly, trying to persuade her to meet him in person. After following Holly, MacPhail, then 16, waited at a bus stop and asked to speak to Holly after she came out of the pizza shop. He then lured her into an alleyway and attacked her. MacPhail inflicted 36 knife wounds, including 5 defensive wounds, in the attack earlier in the evening. When her friend heard her scream, he rushed out of the shop to help, but was also stabbed in the shoulder and leg. Shortly after 5:10 p.m. on Friday, January 27, 2023, the police were alerted about the serious assault of a boy and girl in the Priestpopple area of the town center. Emergency services arrived and found the two in a nearby alleyway with several stab wounds. They were both taken to the hospital. Despite the medical team's efforts, Holly died from 36 injuries. She had broken up with MacPhail just 6 days prior to the attack. Holly's friend, whose identity is protected for legal reasons, received treatment and was later discharged. Officers quickly arrested 16-year-old Logan MacPhail at the scene after he was held by courageous bystanders in a bus shelter. The camera footage shows him identifying himself and naming his victim when the police arrived. He then made what appeared to be a confession, saying she was being too horrible to him, while speaking with an officer in the back of a police van. MacPhail later refused to share his date of birth, claiming he can't read or write, he know nothing. After the attack, MacPhail was charged with killing Holly Newton and injuring another 16-year-old. During police interviews, MacPhail showed a disturbing lack of emotion and admitted that he intended to kill Holly, claiming it was because she treated him horribly. It took 18 months for the case to go to court because MacPhail's lawyers argued that his learning disabilities and autism diagnosis made him unfit to stand trial, meaning he wouldn't fully understand the legal process. However, after reviewing evidence from several experts, the judge determined that MacPhail could participate in the proceedings. Throughout the trial, the defense suggested that his various issues meant he didn't grasp the consequences of his actions, but the jurors disagreed. Justice Hilliard addressed, stating, "Logan aimed to lure Holly into the alleyway, a secluded area where you believed you could attack her without anyone intervening." Hilliard believed Logan had already decided to harm her, as Logan realized from her reactions at the bus stop that she was not interested in rekindling his relationship. Fueled by resentment and jealousy, Logan still managed to plan his attack. Logan waited for the right moment, convinced her to move deeper into the alley. After ensuring a passerby had left, then you took out his knife and launched a brutal assault on her. The judge pointed out that Holly suffered severe knife Logan to her jaw, skull, spine, and shoulder during the attack. Justice Hilliard remarked that inflicting such harm was a horrifying act. Holly's mother was prevented from reaching her in the alley or seeing her in the ambulance due to the dreadful state she was in. The attack was so forceful that the knife broke, with the blade bending significantly. The pathologist mentioned that encountering a knife in such a damaged condition is extremely rare. The judge stated, "He believed you intended to kill her and understood the finality of death." It appears MacPhail carried the knife that day to intimidate Holly by harming himself and decided to attack her when he realized their relationship wouldn't be rekindled just before the incident. Justice Hilliard emphasized, Holly had every right to end the relationship and choose to spend time with others. In concluding his remarks during sentencing, Hilliard acknowledged the significance of the relationship to MacPhail, especially considering his troubled home life. His speech impediment hindered his ability to form relationships and friendships with others, making his bond with Holly's particularly valuable, the judge noting that this contributed to MacPhail's struggle to accept the relationship's end. He noted that while MacPhail expressed remorse, he also demonstrated a tendency to blame Holly. His testimony revealed that he had convinced herself that Holly treated him poorly. Before the verdict was announced, Holly's mother made an emotional statement about the day she learned what happened to her daughter. McCullough said that in the months before her murder, it was clear that Holly was unhappy and no longer wanted to continue the relationship. Because she was so young, she didn't know how to get out of it. For Holly, she often felt sorry for people, which is why she kept going back and moving forward. She said that on Friday, January 27, 2023, their lives changed forever. She mentioned that she had kissed her 4 children goodbye as they left for school, and one of them never returned home. She expressed her disbelief about how any parent could understand receiving a phone call from a stranger saying that their daughter had been stabbed. Those words replayed in her mind as they rushed to the scene, with 2 of her children in the car, crying and scared about what was happening. She stated that she never imagined the horrific reality they would face. Mikala reflected that the look of pure trauma on their children's faces when they saw their sister being taken away in an ambulance was something they would never forget. They conveyed that the gravity of the situation was beyond anything they could express. They added that they would always remember being prevented from seeing their daughter in that alley or in the ambulance, from seeing her open eyes or hearing her last words, knowing that they weren't able to be by her side. They mentioned that they couldn't even hug or touch her in the hospital, stating that their daughter became a crime scene and that she was evidence. Holly's situation is a clear example of domestic abuse. Although the law may prevent from labeling it as such due to her age, Logan was so obsessed with her that he felt if he couldn't be with her, no one else should be either. There is so much media coverage of how many women are killed each year by men, it almost normalizes it for young men like Logan. Things have got to change. MacPhail admitted manslaughter but was convicted of murder as well as wounding with intent. He said he wanted to return some of Holly's belongings, slippers, clothes, and teddy bears, but when he was arrested, he didn't have any of them with him. MacPhail was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 17 years, plus an additional 5 years in prison for intentionally wounding another young man who tried to stop the attack. MacPhail was told that even after serving the minimum term, he would only be released when it was deemed safe to do so. Speaking after the sentencing, Detective Darren Davies of Northumbria Police said it was a truly devastating case, with Holly's future cruelly taken away by MacPhail. Of course, nothing will ever reverse the tragic events of that evening, Detective Davies said, adding that he hopes the result will bring Holly's loved ones a sense of closure so they can attempt to move forward. So many lives have been changed forever by the decisions he made that night, and now he will have plenty of time to think about that in his cell.